What if the story we tell ourselves about human history is incomplete? We all grew up learning a certain timeline, a neat progression from hunter-gatherers to farmers, from the first cities in Mesopotamia to the empires of Rome and beyond. It is a narrative that feels solid, proven, backed by textbooks and decades of research. But what if that timeline is not just missing a few details, but entire epochs? What if, scattered across the globe, lying at the bottom of the ocean or buried beneath dense jungle canopies, there is evidence of societies so advanced and so ancient that their very existence forces us to rewrite everything we thought we knew? This is not a question for fantasy novels. It is the very real and deeply compelling mystery that confronts archaeologists and explorers today. We are standing at the edge of a profound rediscovery, peering into the shadows of our own past, and what we are finding there is astonishing. Today, we are embarking on a journey to 33 specific locations, places that have remained largely unmapped and misunderstood. These are not just famous tourist sites. They are enigmatic ruins that defy easy explanation. We will travel from a hill in Indonesia that may be the world's oldest pyramid to a mysterious underwater structure off the coast of Japan that some believe is a monument from a time when sea levels were hundreds of feet lower. We will explore a Bolivian temple where stones are cut with a precision that rivals modern machinery. And we will delve into a subterranean city in Turkey, so vast it could shelter thousands. Each of these sites is a piece of a gigantic global puzzle. They are the silent witnesses to a forgotten epoch, a period thousands of years before the pyramids of Giza were even conceived, when advanced human cultures may have risen, thrived, and then vanished, leaving behind only these cryptic clues. As we explore these 33 unmapped ruins, we will examine the startling evidence that challenges the conventional narrative head-on. We will look at geological data, architectural anomalies, and carbon dating results that simply do not fit the established historical model. This journey will take us to the very limits of our understanding, forcing us to ask difficult questions about the resilience of human knowledge and the fragility of civilization itself. Prepare to see ancient history in a completely new light. By the end of this exploration, the familiar timeline you learned in school may seem like a simplified sketch of a far richer, more complex, and ultimately more mysterious human story. The secrets have been hidden for millennia, but now they are finally beginning to emerge. But before we can truly appreciate the revolutionary nature of these specific sites, we need to understand what makes a ruin unmapped in the first place. This is a crucial distinction. We often hear about lost cities like Atlantis or El Dorado as mythical places swallowed by jungle or sea. But an unmapped ruin is something different and in many ways far more significant. It's not merely a location that was forgotten. It is a site that actively resists being understood, a place where the very tools we use to decipher the past seem to falter. Imagine an archaeologist arriving at a well-known site like the Roman Colosseum. Its history is documented, its purpose clear, its place in the timeline firmly established. Mapping it is a matter of precision, of adding detail to a story we already know. Now, picture an explorer hacking through a remote jungle and stumbling upon a complex of megalithic stones, carved with symbols that match no known language, constructed with a technique that defies the supposed technological capabilities of the era. This is an unmapped ruin. Its mystery isn't just about being hidden, it's about being an anomaly. The reasons these places remain enigmas are as varied as the sites themselves. Some are protected by their sheer inaccessibility, nestled in dense rainforests, perched on treacherous mountain peaks, or lying in politically volatile regions where scientific expeditions are impossible. Others are cloaked not by geography but by legend. Local folklore might speak of gods or giants building these structures, stories often dismissed by early archaeologists but which sometimes hold kernels of truth about forgotten cultures. The most fascinating unmapped ruins, however, are those that present a direct challenge to our scientific methods. At these locations, carbon dating might produce inconsistent results, or the architectural style might be so unique that it cannot be slotted into any known cultural lineage. The stones themselves might be cut with a geometric precision that seems anachronistic, suggesting a level of skill we didn't believe existed at that point in history. These aren't just old buildings, they are contradictions in stone. The true power of exploring an unmapped ruin lies in the act of mapping itself. This process is far more than just drawing a floor plan. It involves laser scanning, ground-penetrating radar, detailed artifact analysis, and stratigraphic excavation. And it is during this meticulous work that the established historical narrative often begins to crack. Perhaps the foundation of a temple is found to be built upon the ruins of an even older, more sophisticated structure. Maybe the astronomical alignments of the site point to a celestial event thousands of years earlier than the culture credited with its construction. Each new measurement, each newly uncovered artifact can force a reassessment. This is how paradigms shift. It's not through a single dramatic discovery, but through the slow, painstaking accumulation of data that simply does not fit the old model. These ruins force us to confront an uncomfortable possibility that our chronological framework of human civilization, the neat progression from simple to complex, might be built not on bedrock, but on the shifting sands of an incomplete record. To truly grasp the revolutionary nature of these 33 sites, we first need a firm grounding in the story they are up against. The standard timeline of civilization is a narrative most of us absorbed in school, a seemingly straightforward progression that charts humanity's ascent from simplicity to complexity. This model, deeply rooted in Western academic traditions, presents a world where civilization has a single, identifiable birthplace. Around 4,000 years before the Common Era, in the fertile land between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers known as Mesopotamia, the first cities like Uruk and supposedly emerged. Here, according to the textbooks, humans invented writing in the form of cuneiform script, developed codified laws, and built the first ziggurats, setting the template for everything that would follow. From this Mesopotamian cradle, the flame of civilization is shown spreading to other key river valleys. In Egypt, the Old Kingdom pyramids rise a few centuries later, around 2,600 years before the Common Era, demonstrating a powerful, godlike pharaoh and a highly stratified society. Around the same time, far to the east, the sophisticated and remarkably planned cities of the Indus Valley civilization, such as Harappa and Mohenjo-Daro, flourish in what is now Pakistan and northwest India, with their advanced drainage systems and standardized weights and measures. This is followed by the Bronze Age, a period where metallurgy allows for stronger tools and weapons, enabling the rise of empires like the Hittites and the Mycenaeans. Then comes the intellectual and political blossoming of classical Greece and Rome, the expansion of trade routes, the Dark Ages, the Renaissance, and so on, in a more or less linear march toward the modern world. This model is incredibly powerful because it offers a clean, understandable arc. It suggests a gradual, upward climb, a story of continuous, if sometimes uneven, progress. Each society builds upon the discoveries of the last, creating a chain of innovation and cultural development. However, it is crucial to recognize that this timeline is not necessarily a perfect reflection of global reality. Instead, it is largely a product of the archaeological record that has been most accessible, most extensively studied, and, frankly, most prioritized by the institutions that shaped modern historical study. For centuries, the focus was squarely on the Mediterranean and the Near East, the lands of the Bible and the classical authors that formed the foundation of Western education. This focus creates a potentially skewed perspective. What we call the cradle of civilization might be more accurately described as the first cradle we found and decided to write extensively about. It is a model built on the evidence that was most readily available, while vast swaths of the planet, the dense jungles of the Amazon, the high deserts of the Andes, the remote islands of the Pacific remained archaeological blank spots. This conventional timeline, by its very nature, tends to treat societies that developed outside of this established sequence as outliers, latecomers, or mysterious anomalies. It struggles to accommodate the possibility of independent, simultaneous flowering of complexity in different parts of the world, or even more radically, the existence of advanced cultures that predate the supposed first civilizations by thousands of years. The anomalies we are about to explore are not just minor curiosities. They are direct challenges to this deeply ingrained linear narrative, suggesting that the true story of human civilization is far more ancient, diverse, and incredible than we ever imagined. And so we arrive at our first location, a place that doesn't just question the standard timeline, but utterly dismantles it. Perched on a windswept hill in southeastern Turkey, Göbekli Tepe is an archaeological revelation that continues to send shockwaves through our understanding of human prehistory. To put its age into perspective, this site was already ancient when the first stones of Stonehenge were being raised over 6,000 years later. It was a thriving, sacred center thousands of years before the Great Pyramid of Giza was even a glimmer in an Egyptian pharaoh's eye. We are talking about a time around 9,600 years before the Common Era, a period we have long imagined as a primitive era of small, nomadic bands of hunter-gatherers, simply struggling to survive. What they discovered there defies that simplistic image. Göbekli Tepe is not a simple settlement. It is a complex of at least 20 circular enclosures, defined by massive, T-shaped limestone pillars. These are not small stones. The largest pillars weigh over 10 tons and stand nearly 20 feet tall. They were quarried from a nearby bedrock and transported to the hilltop, a feat that would have required a tremendous, coordinated effort. But the sheer scale is only the beginning of the mystery. Each pillar is a work of art, covered in meticulously carved reliefs of animals: foxes, gazelles, scorpions, vultures, and lions. This is not crude scratching. This is sophisticated, symbolic artistry, demonstrating a complex worldview and a shared mythological language. This is where the foundation of the standard model completely crumbles. For over a century, the dominant theory of civilization has been neatly summarized as the agriculture-first model. The story went like this. Humans learned to farm, which led to settled villages, which produced a surplus of food, which in turn allowed for specialization: artisans, priests, leaders, and this social complexity eventually gave rise to religion and monumental architecture. Göbekli Tepe turns this sequence on its head. There is no evidence of agriculture at the site during its main construction phase. The people who built this were, by all accounts, hunter-gatherers. Yet they achieved a level of social organization that textbooks claimed was impossible without farming. This forces a revolutionary question. What if it was the other way around? What if it was the desire to build a grand, communal temple that first brought people together on a large scale? The need to feed hundreds of workers engaged in quarrying, carving, and construction could have been the catalyst that spurred the domestication of wild grains found in the surrounding hills. In this light, religion and a shared spiritual vision may have been the engine for settling down, not the consequence of it. The very impulse to create something permanent, something awe-inspiring for a higher purpose, might be what set us on the path to civilization. Perhaps the most haunting implication of Göbekli Tepe is not what it represents as a beginning, but what it might represent as an end. The sophistication of its construction and art seems to appear fully formed, with no clear evidence of simpler, trial-and-error prototypes nearby. This has led some researchers to a profound and unsettling conclusion, that Göbekli Tepe was not the first of its kind. It may have been the pinnacle of a much older, long-lasting cultural tradition, a tradition that has since vanished from the archaeological record. Around 8000 BC, the site was deliberately and carefully buried under tons of soil, preserved for millennia like a time capsule. Who were these people? What knowledge was lost when their culture faded? Göbekli Tepe stands as a silent, monumental challenge, a testament to a forgotten chapter of human achievement that rewrites the opening pages of our story. From the stark horizons of Turkey, our journey now takes us to the lush, volcanic highlands of West Java in Indonesia, to a site that presents a challenge just as profound as Göbekli Tepe, but on an even grander and more deeply buried scale. At first glance, Gunung Padang appears to be little more than a heavily forested hill, a serene and natural part of the landscape, but this first impression is a complete illusion. What local people have long considered a sacred place, and what early archaeologists initially dismissed as a simple megalithic site, is now being revealed as something far more extraordinary. This is not a hill that happens to have ruins on it. Emerging evidence suggests that the entire hill itself is the ruin. It is a massive, layered pyramidal structure, arguably one of the largest and potentially the oldest megalithic sites on the planet. The true nature of Gunung Padang has only begun to come to light through advanced geological surveying techniques. Teams of researchers have used methods like electrical resistivity tomography, ground-penetrating radar, and most crucially, core drilling. By extracting deep soil and rock samples from various points across the hill, they have been able to peer into its hidden anatomy. The results are nothing short of revolutionary. The structure appears to be built in multiple, distinct phases. The upper layer, which contains the visible megalithic arrangements of columnar basalt rocks, dates to a period around 2,500 to 4,000 years before the Common Era, which alone would make it an ancient and significant site. But the core drilling didn't stop there. As the drills went deeper, they pulled up material from layers that geological analysis suggests could be staggeringly ancient. Some researchers propose that the deepest foundational layers of this pyramid could date back more than 20,000 years. To put that date into context, 20,000 years ago, the world was a very different place. The last ice age, known as the Pleistocene epoch, was still in its final chapters. Vast ice sheets covered much of North America and Europe, and global sea levels were over 100 meters lower than they are today, exposing land bridges and creating continents with shapes we would barely recognize. Humanity, according to the conventional narrative, was living in small, mobile bands, mastering the use of stone tools for hunting and gathering. The idea that anyone during this period was capable of the coordinated effort required to construct a massive, terraced pyramid is, within the standard model, simply inconceivable. If the dating for Gunung Padang's deepest layers is confirmed, it would not just predate the Egyptian pyramids or Stonehenge. It would predate them by well over 10,000 years, effectively doubling the accepted timeline for complex megalithic construction. The visible surface of the site offers its own clues to this advanced capability. The summit is arranged in a series of 5 terraces, accessed by a central staircase. These terraces are paved with thousands of columnar basalt rocks, a type of volcanic stone that naturally forms into hexagonal or pentagonal columns as it cools. The builders of Gunung Padang didn't just use these naturally occurring shapes. They demonstrated a sophisticated understanding of stone, working by carefully shaping, arranging, and interlocking these heavy columns to create walls, platforms, and chambers. The precision of the arrangement suggests a deliberate architectural plan, not a haphazard pile of stones. This was a purposeful, sacred, and immensely difficult undertaking. The implications of Gunung Padang extend far beyond the site itself, reaching into the realm of prehistoric global connections. 20,000 years ago, with sea levels so much lower, the islands of Indonesia were part of a much larger landmass known as Sunderland. This was a vast, fertile peninsula stretching from Southeast Asia. A culture advanced enough to conceive of and build a structure like Gunung Padang would almost certainly have been a seafaring culture, capable of navigating the waters between the islands of Sunderland and beyond. This opens up the tantalizing possibility that the builders were part of a widespread, sophisticated society that thrived in this now submerged world. Their monuments on high ground, like Gunung Padang, survived the rising seas that followed the Ice Age, while their coastal cities and ports were lost forever beneath the waves. The pyramid on the hill, therefore, may not be an isolated mystery, but rather the last surviving peak of a sunken civilization, a solitary sentinel guarding the secrets of a forgotten epoch in human history. Now our exploration moves from the highlands of Indonesia to the deep blue waters off the coast of Japan's westernmost island, Yonaguni. Here, beneath the waves, lies one of the most hotly debated archaeological mysteries on Earth. Discovered by a local diver in the 1980s, the Yonaguni Monument is a massive underwater formation that has split the scientific community right down the middle. Is it a stunningly beautiful and complex natural geological formation, or is it the sunken ruin of a man-made structure from a time when this spot was dry land? The answer to that question carries implications that are nothing short of earth-shattering. Descending to a depth of around 80 feet, divers are met with an awe-inspiring sight. A colossal structure over 150 feet long and nearly 90 feet tall rises from the seabed. Its most striking features are not its size but its stark, geometric appearance. The rock face is dominated by what appear to be massive, perfectly straight steps forming a giant terrace. There are sharp 90-degree angles where walls seem to meet. There are two prominent pillars that look like they were placed to support a great weight above. Perhaps most compelling of all is a feature often called the turtle, a flat platform with a distinct, almost sculpted head-like protrusion, and nearby, a trench that encircles the entire main structure like a protective moat. The core of the debate lies in the origin of these perfect shapes. Geologists who argue for a natural origin point to the fact that the monument is made of sandstone, a rock that naturally fractures along straight lines and flat plains due to tectonic activity. They suggest that the powerful currents in the area have simply eroded the stone along these pre-existing joints, creating the illusion of carved steps and platforms. It is a classic example of pareidolia. They say the human brain's tendency to see familiar patterns like architecture in random natural shapes. However, proponents of the man-made theory, led by the late marine geologist Professor Masaki Kimura, counter with a powerful argument. While sandstone can fracture in straight lines, it does not naturally form into such a complex, interconnected series of right angles, steps, and archways all in one place. They point to specific features that seem incredibly difficult to attribute to chance. For instance, a narrow, L-shaped channel cut into the rock, or the fact that what appears to be a carved relief of an animal was found on one wall. Furthermore, they argue that loose stone blocks found at the site, which are not native to the surrounding seabed, look like they were quarried and moved into position. The entire complex, they insist, has a unified architectural logic that nature alone could not have produced. If this monument is indeed the work of human hands, the next question is the most profound one: when was it built? Sea levels have not always been where they are today. During the last ice age, which reached its peak around 20,000 years ago, so much water was locked up in glaciers that global sea levels were nearly 400 feet lower. The area around Yonaguni would have been a coastal plain or a high point overlooking a vast expanse of dry land. Scientists estimate that this particular site would have been above water until roughly 10,000 years ago, a date that coincides almost exactly with the end of the glacial period and the rapid melting of the ice sheets. This timeline places the potential construction of the Yonaguni Monument in the same incredible epoch as Göbekli Tepe in Turkey. We are not talking about a culture that existed just before the Egyptians. We are talking about a society flourishing thousands of years prior. This possibility leads us to a haunting conclusion. The Yonaguni Monument could be a tangible piece of evidence for a sophisticated coastal civilization that was utterly lost to the rising oceans. Its builders would have been a people with the knowledge and organization to undertake massive stone constructions, likely with a deep connection to the sea. When the glaciers melted, their world, their cities, their ports, their entire cultural footprint would have been swallowed by the Pacific in a relatively short period of time. This is not merely a theoretical idea. It is a story etched into the collective memory of humanity. Cultures across the globe, from the Mesopotamian epic of Gilgamesh to the biblical story of Noah, and even Plato's tale of Atlantis, all share a common thread: a cataclysmic flood that wiped away a great civilization. The Yonaguni Monument stands as a silent, underwater witness, a potential piece of geological proof for these ancient myths. It represents the ghost of a coastline and perhaps the ghost of a people whose history was erased by the sea. Leaving the submerged mystery of Yonaguni behind, we now travel to the windswept coast of Brittany in northwestern France, where an entirely different kind of enigma stretches across the landscape. Here in the small town of Carnac, you will find not a single monumental structure, but a sprawling, seemingly endless collection of standing stones. This is not a circle like Stonehenge. It is something far more extensive and, in many ways, more bewildering. The Carnac alignments are a vast archaeological complex consisting of over 3,000 prehistoric megaliths, arranged in long, parallel rows that march across the countryside for nearly 4 miles. To stand amidst these rows is to be immersed in a scale that is almost incomprehensible. It is a landscape deliberately and painstakingly organized by human hands thousands of years ago, and its true purpose remains one of Europe's most captivating puzzles. The sheer logistics of creating the Carnac alignments are staggering to contemplate. These are not small markers. Many of the stones weigh several tons, and they were erected by a society that, according to our standard historical models, relied on stone tools and lacked the wheel. The effort required to quarry, transport, and precisely position thousands of these massive stones speaks to a level of social organization that we rarely attribute to Neolithic communities. This was not the work of a few isolated villages. It would have required a sustained, communal effort spanning generations, directed by a clear and powerful shared vision. The organization needed to plan and execute such a colossal project implies a hierarchical society with leaders, engineers, and a large, coordinated labor force, challenging the notion that early European societies were simple and egalitarian. When you look at a map of the alignments, the precision is breathtaking. The stones are grouped into three major sections: Manek, Camario, and Kaleskan, each containing lines that contain hundreds of menhirs. The rows are remarkably straight, and the stones generally decrease in height along the length of the alignments, creating a deliberate visual rhythm. This isn't a random scattering of rocks, it is a carefully designed composition on a territorial scale. Many researchers have theorized that such precise, linear arrangements must have an astronomical function. The most compelling hypothesis suggests the rows are aligned with the rising or setting sun on the solstices or equinoxes, effectively turning the entire area into a gigantic celestial calendar. This would have been a vital tool for an agricultural society, marking the changing seasons for planting and harvest. Others propose the lines acted as a sacred processional path, guiding people through a ritual landscape for ceremonies that connected them to their ancestors and the cosmos. Yet for every theory, a new question arises. If it was a calendar, why was it built on such an immense, redundant scale? A few dozen stones could have marked the solar positions just as effectively. If it was a territorial marker, what kind of society needed to define its domain with such an overwhelming display of effort and permanence? The true extent of the culture that built Carnac is still largely unmapped. While the visible stones are impressive, what lies beneath the surface might be even more revealing. The area is dotted with burial mounds or tumuli and single, massive standing stones like the Grand Menhir Brisset, which, if still standing, would have been the largest menhir in the world. This suggests that the alignments were just one part of a much larger, integrated complex of ritual and funerary sites, the full scope of which we are still uncovering. The mystery of Carnac is deepened by the fact that the builders left no written records. Unlike the pyramids of Egypt, there are no hieroglyphs to decipher, no inscriptions to interpret. We are left with only the silent stones themselves and the patterns they form across the land. This forces us to read the landscape like a text in a forgotten language. The alignments stand as a testament to the human impulse to impose order on the world, to create meaning through monumental effort. They represent a deep, sophisticated understanding of the environment and a desire to connect the earthly realm with the cycles of the heavens. The culture that conceived of Carnac possessed a worldview and an organizational genius that we are only beginning to appreciate. A reminder that the prehistoric world was likely far more complex and intellectually rich than our history books have traditionally allowed. Our journey now takes us far from the familiar continents, out into the vast expanse of the Pacific Ocean, to a place that feels more like a dream than a historical site. On the remote island of Pohnpei, part of the Caroline Islands in Micronesia, lies the ruins of Nan Madol. To call it a city is almost an understatement. It is a marvel of engineering and a monument to human ambition. Imagine a collection of nearly 100 artificial islands perched atop a coral reef with canals of seawater flowing between them. This is why Nan Madol has earned the nickname the Venice of the Pacific. But unlike Venice, this city was not built with bricks and mortar. Its foundations and walls are constructed from colossal, prismatic logs of basalt rock, a material that presents a logistical puzzle as deep as the ocean surrounding it. The construction of Nan Madol is the core of its mystery. The basalt used for the buildings naturally forms into massive, crystalline columns, almost like a bundle of giant stone pencils. The builders quarried these immense logs, some weighing 40 or 50 tons, from the other side of the island. How they transported them to the reef is a question that has baffled researchers for decades. The local oral tradition offers a poetic, if enigmatic, explanation. It says the founders of Nan Madol, two brother magicians named Olasipa and Olasopa, used magic to levitate the stones and fly them through the air to the building site. While we search for a more scientific answer, This legend powerfully conveys the sheer impossibility of the task as perceived by later generations. The practical reality would have been incredibly difficult. One theory suggests the builders might have loaded the stones onto rafts or canoes and floated them around the coast. Another proposes they created a system of ropes and rollers to move them overland. Regardless of the method, the undertaking speaks volumes about the society that accomplished it. Moving stones of this size requires not just muscle, but a highly organized, stratified society with a powerful central authority, a chief or priest king who could command the labor of hundreds, if not thousands, of people over many generations. This level of social complexity is what we typically associate with great empires, yet here it is, manifesting on a tiny, isolated island in the middle of the world's largest ocean. Carbon dating of materials found at the site places its peak as a political and ceremonial center around the 12th century of the Common Era, which aligns with the timeline of other Pacific Island cultures. However, this date only deepens the mystery rather than solving it. If Nan Madol was built by the Sordalor dynasty, as historians believe, why does its architectural style have no clear precursors in the region? The use of massive basalt logs in a crisscross log cabin style of construction is unique. There is no evidence of a gradual evolution of building techniques on Pohnpei. Nan Madol appears almost fully formed. This has led to compelling speculation that the Sordalors may not have been the original inventors of this technology. Instead, they could have been the inheritors of a much older seafaring tradition. The Pacific was not crossed in a single leap. For thousands of years, skilled navigators island hopped across the vast ocean, carrying with them not just people and plants, but knowledge and architectural ideas. It is possible that Nan Madol represents the final, magnificent flowering of a building tradition that had been developing for centuries on now submerged atolls or other islands that have since vanished. The city's location on a reef rather than the main island is itself a clue. It suggests a people profoundly connected to the sea, for whom the ocean was not a barrier but a highway. The canals functioned as streets, making canoes the primary mode of transport within the city, a design that would be second nature to an advanced maritime culture. The isolation of Nan Madol, therefore, might be an illusion. It may not be an isolated anomaly, but the last surviving remnant of a once widespread Pacific civilization, a stone echo of a seafaring world we have only just begun to understand. While the grand cities of Harappa and Mohenjo-Daro have long been celebrated as the brilliant pioneers of South Asian civilization, a powerful and persistent thread in ancient Indian literature points to an even grander, more foundational story. For millennia, the sacred Vedic texts have sung praises of a mighty, life-giving river known as the Sarasvati, described as flowing parallel to the Indus, a vast and dominant artery around which a great culture thrived. For a long time, many historians dismissed these descriptions as mythological allegory, a poetic imagining of a perfect, heavenly river. The archaeological map of ancient India seemed clear: the Indus Valley was the sole cradle. But then, science began to catch up with the old songs. In the late 20th century, geologists and remote sensing experts made a startling discovery. By analyzing soil sediments and studying satellite photographs, they identified the paleo-channels of a massive, long-vanished river system exactly where the Vedas said the Saraswati would be. This was not a myth, it was a ghost river, a watercourse that had once been mightier than the Indus itself, but which had dried up due to climatic shifts and tectonic changes around 4,000 years ago. This geological confirmation fundamentally changed the search for South Asia's earliest civilizations. Archaeologists were no longer looking for a single, lost city, but for the remnants of an entire riverine society that had simply vanished when its water source disappeared. The key tool in this new search was satellite imagery, which could peer through the layers of soil and time to reveal what the naked eye could not see on the ground. What these images revealed was nothing short of revolutionary. Scattered along the ancient, dry bed of the Sarasvati, researchers identified the spectral outlines of hundreds and potentially thousands of previously unknown settlements. These were not just small villages, many were large, complex urban centers, rivaling the size and sophistication of the most famous Indus Valley sites. This was not a separate civilization from the Indus. It was part of the same vast cultural and economic network, now recognized by many scholars as the Indus-Sarasvati civilization. The implications of this discovery are staggering, forcing a complete re-evaluation of the scale and nature of early urbanization in the region. Instead of a civilization confined primarily to the Indus River basin, we now see evidence of a sprawling, densely populated cultural complex that stretched across an area of over 1 million square kilometers, from the foothills of the Himalayas to the coast of the Arabian Sea. This was not a collection of isolated city-states, but an integrated world connected by the twin lifelines of the Indus and Sarasvati rivers. The drying up of the Sarasvati around 2,000 years before the Common Era provides a compelling, environmentally driven explanation for the eventual decline of this entire civilization. As the river dwindled, the cities and towns that depended on it for agriculture and trade would have been forced to abandon their homes, likely migrating eastward toward the fertile Gangetic Plain, taking their knowledge, culture, and social structures with them, and seeding the next phases of Indian history. This revelation does more than just add dots to an archaeological map. It forges a powerful link between ancient literary tradition and hard scientific evidence. The Vedic hymns, once seen as purely spiritual texts, now appear to contain preserved geographical memories of a real, lost world. The civilization that flourished along the Sarasvati was not a fantasy. It was a historical reality, one whose immense scale we are only beginning to comprehend. The hundreds of unmapped settlements waiting to be excavated along its banks promise to rewrite our understanding of this pivotal era, suggesting that the roots of South Asian civilization run deeper and spread wider than we ever dared to believe. Crossing the globe now to the humid lowlands of the Gulf of Mexico, we encounter a civilization whose sudden emergence is as monumental as the artifacts they left behind. The Olmecs of ancient Mesoamerica are often called the mother culture of the region, the wellspring from which later societies like the Maya and the Aztec would eventually flow. They flourished from roughly 1500 to 400 years before the Common Era, and their influence is undeniable. Yet, the more we learn about the Olmecs, the more mysterious their own origins become. They seem to appear on the historical stage fully formed, with a complex society, sophisticated art, and grand ceremonial centers, but with no clear archaeological trail showing a gradual development from simpler, local villages. It is as if a fully realized civilization simply stepped into the jungle, leaving behind some of the most baffling and iconic sculptures ever discovered. The most powerful symbols of this mystery are the colossal Olmec heads. 17 of these immense basalt portraits have been unearthed, primarily at the major Olmec sites of San Lorenzo and La Venta. To stand before one is an awe-inspiring experience. Carved from a single, gigantic block of stone, they stand up to 10 feet tall and weigh as much as 40 tons, the weight of several large elephants. Each head is unique, depicting an individual with a stern, commanding expression, wearing what appears to be a protective helmet, but it is the facial features that have ignited decades of intense debate and speculation. The heads have broad, flat noses and full, fleshy lips, characteristics that many observers have noted bear a striking resemblance to features common in parts of Africa. This has led to a controversial theory that the Olmec civilization was sparked by transoceanic contact with visitors from Africa or perhaps other parts of the world thousands of years before Columbus. Mainstream archaeology, however, offers a different interpretation. Scholars point out that these features are not unknown among indigenous American populations. They argue that the heads are likely portraits of powerful Olmec rulers, carved to project their authority and divine connection for eternity. The helmets they wear could be protective gear for the ritual ball game, a central part of Mesoamerican culture for centuries to come. The debate is a fascinating example of how we interpret the past through our own perspectives. Whether the heads represent indigenous leaders or hint at wider global connections, their very existence is a testament to a society with immense resources and artistic skill. The basalt for these colossal sculptures was quarried from the Tuxtla Mountains, dozens of miles away from where the heads were ultimately placed. Transporting these multi-ton stones through swamps and rivers without the use of the wheel or draft animals remains an incredible logistical puzzle, solved by a people whose organizational abilities seem to have materialized out of nowhere. The heart of this sophisticated society was the ceremonial center of La Venta. Built on an island in a swamp, La Venta was a city of earth and stone, a deliberate construction that transformed the natural landscape into a sacred space. Its most striking feature is the Great Pyramid, a massive fluted cone of clay that dominates the site. While it may not look like the stone pyramids of Egypt, its volume is enormous, representing a staggering amount of labor organized and directed by a powerful central authority. But the true genius of the Olmecs is revealed in more subtle finds. Archaeologists have discovered intricate mosaics painstakingly laid out on the ground, made from hundreds of polished blocks of serpentine rock. These mosaics were not meant to be displayed. After their careful construction, they were deliberately buried, perhaps as an offering to the earth itself. This practice reveals a worldview of great complexity, where ritual and cosmic order were woven into the very fabric of the city. This combination of sudden sophistication and enigmatic origins leads to a compelling possibility that goes beyond the transoceanic contact debate. Perhaps the Olmecs were not the first mother culture, but were themselves the inheritors of an even older, yet to be discovered foundational society. The idea is that a precursor culture, perhaps one that lived along the now submerged coastlines from the end of the last ice age, developed the basic template of Mesoamerican civilization: the cosmology, the calendar, the architectural principles. The Olmecs, then, would be the first culture we can clearly see in the archaeological record to have adopted and magnified this inherited knowledge, building their magnificent centers like La Venta as a powerful new expression of a very old tradition. Their lack of clear local precursors might be because their true predecessors lived in areas that are now underwater, their cities and villages swallowed by the rising sea levels thousands of years before the Olmecs rose to prominence. The Olmec heads, therefore, may not be staring out from the beginning of time, but from a later chapter, their stoic expressions guarding the secrets of a lost epoch that set the stage for all the civilizations of ancient Mexico. This brings us to a discovery that bridges the gap between ancient myth and tangible reality, taking us to the western coast of India. For thousands of years, the stories of Lord Krishna, one of Hinduism's most revered deities, have been passed down through generations. Central to these legends is his magnificent capital city, Dwarka, a place of unparalleled splendor and power, said to be built upon the land reclaimed from the sea. The epic Mahabharata describes it as a fortified city filled with beautiful palaces, wide moats, and bustling harbors, a thriving center of trade and culture. But the story does not end there. The legends also tell of a tragic conclusion. Following Krishna's departure from the world, the great city of Dwarka was swallowed by the ocean, lost to the waves as if it had never existed. For centuries, this was considered a powerful allegory, a poetic metaphor for the impermanence of all things. But what if the story was more than a myth? What if it was a historical memory preserved in sacred texts? This question is what drives the exploration off the coast of modern-day Dwarka in Gujarat. Here, marine archaeologists have undertaken the monumental task of searching the seabed for evidence that could confirm the legend. Their efforts have been rewarded with findings that are as compelling as they are controversial. Scattered across the ocean floor at depths ranging from 20 to over 100 feet lie the silent remains of a once great settlement. Divers have mapped out what appear to be the foundations of massive stone walls, some running in straight lines for hundreds of feet, suggesting a large planned urban layout. The seabed is also littered with stone anchors, the kind used by ancient mariners to secure their ships. These are not small, simple weights. Many are large, carefully carved stones with holes for ropes, indicating they were used by substantial seafaring vessels. Alongside these anchors, archaeologists have recovered a wealth of artifacts from the sediment pottery shards, beads, and even ancient inscriptions. The crucial piece of evidence, however, lies in the depth at which these structures are found. Sea levels have not been constant throughout history. By studying ancient shorelines and the rate of sea level rise, scientists can estimate when a particular coastal area would have been submerged. The submerged ruins at Dwarka lie at a depth that corresponds with a period of significant oceanic transgression around 3,500 years ago, or approximately 1,500 years before the Common Era. This timeline is incredibly significant. It places the submergence of this city right at the transitional period between the end of the Indus Valley, or more accurately, the Indus-Sarasvati civilization, and the beginning of the later Vedic period in India. It suggests that a major urban center, a powerful maritime kingdom, existed on the Indian coast at a time when our historical maps of the region are surprisingly blank. Of course, as with any discovery that challenges established timelines, the dating of the Dwarka site is hotly contested. Some archaeologists argue that the stone structures could be much later, perhaps from the medieval period, and that the association with the Krishna legend is coincidental. They point out that obtaining secure carbon dates from underwater structures is exceptionally difficult, as currents can shift artifacts and confuse the stratigraphic layers. The pottery styles found are also open to interpretation, with some pieces appearing to be from a later era. This scientific caution is necessary and healthy, but it does not diminish the powerful implications of the find. Even if the specific date of 1,500 years before the Common Era is debated, the sheer scale of the submerged ruins is undeniable. This was not a small fishing village. It was a significant port city, with the infrastructure to support a large population and engage in extensive maritime trade across the Indian Ocean. The potential validation of the Dwarka legend would be a landmark moment in archaeology, not unlike the discovery of Troy, which was also once thought to be purely mythical. It would demonstrate that ancient texts can contain kernels of historical truth, preserving memories of real events and places across millennia. The sinking of a great city is a cataclysm that would have been seared into the cultural memory of its survivors, a story passed down from parent to child until it was eventually recorded in epic poetry. The discovery at Dwarka pushes back the timeline for advanced maritime activity in the Indian Ocean, suggesting that sophisticated naval architecture and long-distance trade routes were established much earlier than previously believed. It paints a picture of a dynamic coastal civilization that was intimately connected to the sea, a civilization whose final fate was to be reclaimed by the very waters that gave it life and prosperity. Now let us sail to the heart of the Mediterranean Sea, to the sun-drenched islands of Malta, where another silent sentinel from the deep past stands in defiance of our historical expectations. The Gigantoja temples, whose very name means giant's tower in Maltese, are not just ancient, they are primordial, dating back to approximately 3,600 years before the Common Era. These structures are genuinely staggering in their age. To fully grasp this, consider that the Great Pyramid of Giza would not be built for another 1,000 years. The first stones of Stonehenge would not be laid for over a millennium after that. The Gigantoja complex is a true prehistoric elder, a relic from a time that feels almost impossibly remote, yet it displays a level of architectural confidence and spiritual grandeur that seems to belong to a much later age. Approaching the temples, the first thing that strikes you is the sheer scale of the limestone blocks used in their construction. These are not merely large stones, they are colossal, cyclopean slabs, with some of the outer walls featuring individual blocks that weigh many tons. The local legend, which gives the site its name, speaks of a giantess named Sansuna who carried these massive stones on her head while nursing a baby, building the temples as a place of worship. While this is a charming folk tale, it accurately conveys the sense of awe and impossibility that the structures inspire. How did a society, which according to our models possessed only simple stone and wooden tools, manage to quarry, transport, and precisely position such immense weights? The construction technique itself is a marvel of early engineering. The walls are built using a method where larger stones form the base, with progressively smaller stones placed on top, creating a stable, inward-sloping wall that has managed to withstand thousands of years of Mediterranean weather. The complexity of Gigantoja extends far beyond its massive walls. The site consists of two separate but adjacent temples, each with a distinctive cloverleaf shape, a design created by multiple semicircular chambers or apses branching off from a central corridor. This is not a simple single-room shrine. It is a sophisticated multi-room complex with a clear axial plan, suggesting a highly developed ritual purpose. The temples feature altars, libation holes where liquid offerings might have been poured, and thresholds made from single, enormous slabs of stone. Some archaeologists believe that the temples may have even been partially roofed, an incredible feat considering the span of the chambers. This was not a temporary shelter. It was a permanent, purpose-built sanctuary designed to facilitate specific and complex ceremonies for a large community. The culture that built Gigantoja is known to archaeologists as the Temple Period culture of Malta, and the evidence points toward a society that was remarkably peaceful and deeply spiritual. Unlike many other ancient sites, there is no evidence of defensive walls, weapons, or fortifications. Instead, the archaeological record is rich with artifacts related to a fertility cult. Excavations have uncovered numerous corpulent statues of figures, often called fat ladies, which are widely interpreted as representations of a mother goddess, a deity of fertility, abundance, and the life cycle. This focus on a nurturing, feminine divinity suggests a society that revered the natural world and the mysteries of birth and creation. The temples themselves, with their womb-like chambers and narrow, entrance passages that symbolically lead from the outside world into a sacred inner space, reinforce this connection to a fertility-based worldview. Then, around 2,500 years before the Common Era, this vibrant temple building culture vanished. The sites were abandoned, and the islands seem to have been largely depopulated for centuries. The reason for this sudden collapse remains one of Malta's greatest mysteries. There is no evidence of a violent invasion or a catastrophic war. Theories point to environmental factors, such as severe drought or soil exhaustion from intensive farming, which could have led to famine and societal breakdown. Another possibility is disease or a political and spiritual crisis that caused the people to lose faith in the old ways. Whatever the cause, the disappearance was so complete that when new peoples arrived on the island centuries later, they encountered these magnificent temples with no knowledge of who built them, attributing them to giants. This complete vanishing act is perhaps the most telling clue about the Giganteja temples. Their sophistication is not that of a first attempt. The cloverleaf design, the corbelling techniques, the precise stonework, all of it points to a long period of prior development and refinement. Where are the prototypes? Where are the simpler, cruder versions that must have preceded these masterpieces? This missing archaeological record is a gaping hole in our understanding. It strongly suggests that the temple period culture did not invent this complex architecture overnight. They were likely the culmination of a long-lasting tradition, a tradition that may have developed on Malta over many centuries or even millennia, but whose earliest phases are lost to us, perhaps buried beneath later constructions or submerged by rising sea levels around the Maltese coastline. The Giganteja temples, therefore, stand not as a beginning, but as a magnificent peak, the last and greatest achievement of a people whose origins and ultimate fate are still hidden in the mists of time, a silent testament to a peaceful, goddess-worshipping civilization that achieved architectural greatness long before the age of pyramids. While the megaliths of Malta stand exposed to the sun, our next destination takes us deep beneath the earth into a man-made underworld of staggering proportions. The story of the Longyou Caves begins not with a grand archaeological expedition, but with a curious act of local initiative. In the quiet village of Longyou in China's Zhejiang province, the year 1992 saw a group of farmers decide to pump the water out of a small, deep pond they had known their entire lives. They believed it to be a natural sinkhole, but they hoped it might be shallow enough to reveal fish or perhaps even treasure. As the pumps worked for days, they were met not with a muddy bottom, but with the astonishing sight of carved stone walls. What they had assumed was a pond was in fact a flooded entrance to a colossal, hand-excavated cavern. This single discovery would soon lead to the uncovering of not one, but 24 such caves, an entire hidden complex that had been completely unknown to the outside world, silently holding its secrets for centuries. To step inside one of these caves is to enter a space that feels both ancient and impossibly precise. The scale is almost difficult to process. Each cavern is immense, with some reaching heights of over 100 feet and spanning areas larger than a modern sports arena. This is not a narrow, winding tunnel system. These are vast, underground halls with ceilings supported by massive, evenly spaced stone pillars that have been left in place by the builders to support the immense weight of the mountain above. The walls, the pillars, and the high ceilings are all covered in a uniform, striking pattern of parallel chisel marks. These are not random scratches. They are consistent, angled grooves that cover every single surface in a sweeping, decorative pattern. This deliberate artistry suggests that the caves were not merely functional quarries. The builders went to extraordinary lengths to give these subterranean spaces a finished, aesthetic quality, a clear indication that people were meant to inhabit or use these halls for a significant purpose. The mystery of the Longyou Caves deepens with every detail we examine. The architectural precision is remarkable. The walls are perfectly flat, meeting the ceilings at consistent, sharp 90-degree angles throughout the vast chambers. In some caves there are carved staircases, bridges, and even what appear to be ritual pools or channels. The layout demonstrates a sophisticated understanding of rock mechanics and engineering. The pillars are positioned to optimally distribute stress, and the slope of the ceilings is calculated to prevent collapse. This is the work of master engineers, not amateur diggers. Yet, for a project of such immense scale and skill, there is a deafening silence in the historical record. No document, no local legend, not a single scroll or stone inscription from any period in Chinese history makes any mention of the construction of these 24 colossal caves. It is as if 1,000 workers labored for generations and then simply vanished from memory. This silence leads to one of the most baffling logistical puzzles: what happened to all the rock? Geologists estimate that the creation of this cave network would have required the removal of nearly 1 million cubic meters of solid sandstone. That is enough stone to build a small mountain. The act of quarrying such a volume would have generated an unimaginable amount of rubble and debris. Yet there is no trace of this waste material anywhere in the surrounding countryside. No massive spoil heaps, no nearby constructions made from this distinct stone, no evidence whatsoever of where all that rock was taken. It simply disappeared. The builders somehow managed to extract, transport, and dispose of a literal mountain of stone without leaving a single clue behind. This logistical feat seems almost supernatural, defying all conventional understanding of ancient large-scale projects. Dating the caves has proven to be exceptionally challenging. Unlike organic materials that can be carbon dated, the sandstone itself cannot provide a precise age. Some estimates, based on the degree of erosion inside the caves and the style of the tool marks, place their construction around 2,000 years ago during the Western Han Dynasty. However, this is little more than an educated guess. If they are that old, their absence from the meticulous historical records of the Han Dynasty is even more perplexing. Other researchers point to the possibility that they could be far older, perhaps dating back to a much earlier, less documented period. The purpose of the caves is another layer of the enigma. Were they a secret imperial quarry for a massive building project that never happened? A hidden refuge for a community during a time of war? A grand underground ritual complex for an esoteric religion? None of the theories fully explain the combination of immense scale, precise engineering, decorative finish, and total historical invisibility. The Longyou Caves stand as a profound monument to a lost chapter in human endeavor. They represent an undertaking of almost unimaginable effort, executed with brilliant skill, and then seemingly erased from human knowledge. They force us to confront the uncomfortable reality that our historical record is not just incomplete, but may be missing entire sagas of cultural and technological achievement. This is not a case of a forgotten temple or a sunken city. It is an entire underground landscape, a hidden world carved by the hands of a people whose identity and purpose remain locked within the silent, beautifully marked stone. The caves are a humbling reminder that the ground beneath our feet can hold secrets far greater than we ever suspect, waiting for a curious farmer with a water pump to begin the long process of revelation. High on the arid Bolivian Altiplano, at a breathtaking altitude of over 12,000 feet above sea level, lie the ruins of a city that seems to defy both its environment and our understanding of ancient engineering. This is Tiahuanaco, a sprawling pre-Incan metropolis that was once the vibrant heart of a powerful empire dominating the Andes. But within this vast complex of pyramids, temples, and monolithic gateways, one site stands apart as a profound and enduring enigma. It is called Puma Punku, which translates to the door of the Puma, and to walk among its shattered ruins is to witness a level of stonework so advanced, so precise, that it appears to belong in a modern machine shop rather than an ancient archaeological site. The scene at Puma Punku today is one of controlled chaos, a vast courtyard littered with the remains of what was once a magnificent platform or temple. But it is the nature of these remains that has captivated and baffled researchers for centuries. Scattered across the ground are massive stone blocks, primarily crafted from two incredibly hard materials, andesite and red sandstone. The andesite was quarried from a site over 50 miles away across Lake Titicaca, while the sandstone was sourced from a quarry nearly 10 miles distant. The logistics of moving these multi-ton stones to this high-altitude location are formidable enough, but it is the finishing of the stones that plunges the site into the realm of the extraordinary. These are not simply rough-hewn blocks. They have been shaped with a geometric precision that is utterly staggering. Many of the pieces are H-shaped blocks, featuring a series of perfectly flat surfaces and recesses that interlock with other stones in a complex, modular fashion, much like a child's Lego bricks or a sophisticated piece of modern cabinetry. The edges are sharp, unwavering right angles with no visible tool marks to suggest how such perfection was achieved. Even more baffling are the intricate details, shallow, precisely carved channels that run along the faces of the stones, and most remarkably, drill holes that pierce through the hard andesite with a consistency that suggests the use of a fixed, stable drill press, not handheld tools. The holes are perfectly cylindrical and uniform, with no sign of the wandering or tapering that typically occurs with ancient hand drilling techniques. This level of precision is what makes Puma Punku seem so anachronistic. The technology required to achieve such flawless cuts, perfect right angles, and uniform drill holes in extremely hard stone implies the use of specialized tools, advanced metallurgy for those tools, and a sophisticated knowledge of geometry and engineering principles. For a culture that, according to conventional history, worked with stone and bronze tools, the accomplishment seems almost impossible. The stones fit together so tightly that, in their original state, a razor blade could not be inserted between them. This is a technique known as ashlar masonry, seen in other ancient marvels like the pyramids of Egypt or the walls of Sacsayhuaman in Peru. But at Puma Punku, it is executed with a modular complexity and a miniaturized precision that is arguably unmatched anywhere else in the ancient world. This technological marvel is at the center of a fierce chronological debate. Mainstream archaeology, based on carbon dating of organic materials found in the area, places the peak of Tiahuanaco and the construction of Puma Punku around 500 to 600 years after the start of the Common Era. This timeline fits comfortably within the established narrative of pre-Incan Andean civilizations. However, a growing number of researchers point to evidence that suggests this date might only reflect a period of reoccupation or reconstruction, not the original founding. They argue that geological and astronomical clues point to a far more ancient origin. One compelling line of evidence involves the site's relationship with Lake Titicaca. The ruins of Tiahuanaco, including Puma Punku, are now situated several miles from the lake's shore and over 100 feet above its current water level. Yet the area is littered with ancient seashells and what appear to be the remains of docks and wharfs. This suggests that when the city was first built, the shoreline of Lake Titicaca was significantly higher, lapping at its very foundations. Geological studies indicate that such a heist, and for the lake, occurred not thousands, but tens of thousands of years ago. Furthermore, some researchers have analyzed the astronomical alignments of the main structures, arguing that they correspond to the position of the stars not in 500 CE, but in a much earlier epoch, potentially as far back as 15,000 years ago. If even a fraction of this earlier dating is accurate, the implications are revolutionary. It would mean that a culture possessing what we would consider near-industrial stone working technology was flourishing in South America at the end of the last ice age, a time when humanity is supposed to have been comprised of simple hunter-gatherers. Puma Punku, therefore, becomes more than just a mysterious ruin. It becomes a potential piece of evidence for a lost chapter of human history, a precursor civilization whose technological achievements were so advanced that their scattered remnants, like the precision-cut stones of this Bolivian plateau, continue to challenge the very foundations of our historical timeline. The site stands as a silent stone testament to a level of skill we are only now beginning to appreciate, forcing us to wonder if the true masters of stone remain anonymous, their secrets buried not just in the ground but in the depths of time itself. While the pyramids of Giza stand as the ultimate symbol of Egyptian achievement, their very perfection can sometimes obscure the human effort and potential failure behind their creation. To truly understand the audacity of ancient Egyptian engineering, we must travel south to the sun-scorched granite quarries of Aswan. Here, lying in situ, still connected to the living bedrock, is a monument not to success but to ambition. This is the unfinished obelisk, a breathtaking project that, had it been completed, would have dwarfed every other obelisk ever erected. A single piece of stone intended to reach a height of over 100 feet and weigh an almost incomprehensible 1,200 tons. To put that weight into perspective, it is heavier than a fully loaded jumbo jet. This was not just a construction project, it was a statement of power, a testament to a pharaoh's desire to reach for the heavens, and it offers us an unparalleled, frozen-in-time glimpse into the methods and the immense confidence of these ancient stone masters. The story of the obelisk is written in the very rock itself, and it is a story that ends abruptly. As workers carved deeper and deeper into the red granite, a fatal flaw appeared, a large, unexpected crack snaking through the stone. This flaw rendered the entire monolith structurally unsound. The project was immediately abandoned, leaving the giant obelisk forever entombed in its quarry, a silent witness to a dream that cracked under pressure. Yet this failure is our greatest archaeological gift. Because the workers walked away, they left behind a perfect workshop, a step-by-step guide to how these colossal needles were born. The entire extraction process is laid bare, allowing us to reverse engineer the techniques with stunning clarity. The method itself was deceptively simple yet required Herculean patience and coordination. The chosen granite bed was first smoothed and leveled. Then, artisans would have meticulously drawn the outline of the obelisk onto the rock surface. The real work began with teams of laborers using hand-held balls of dolerite, a stone even harder than granite. They would not cut the stone but rather pound it. Sitting or standing in closely spaced trenches, they would relentlessly hammer these dolerite balls along the marked lines, effectively pulverizing the granite directly beneath them into a fine powder. This process created deep, narrow channels on all sides of the intended obelisk, gradually isolating it from the surrounding bedrock. It was a method of subtraction by brute force and persistence, a battle of attrition against the mountain itself. The scale of this undertaking is almost beyond belief. The trenches surrounding the unfinished obelisk are so narrow that workers would have had very little room to swing their tools effectively. The heat, the dust, the noise, the working conditions would have been unimaginably harsh. Scholars estimate that a team of hundreds of workers, toiling in shifts day and night, would have required many months, perhaps even over a year, just to carve out these isolating channels to the necessary depth. This was an immense investment of time, resources, and human labor for a single object, a clear indication of the obelisk's supreme importance in Egyptian religion and statecraft. Once freed, the plan would have been to lever the obelisk onto a sledge, drag it to the Nile, and load it onto a specially built barge for its journey downstream, a logistical nightmare that adds another layer of awe to the entire endeavor. But perhaps the most profound implication of the unfinished obelisk is not the how, but the why. Why would any society attempt such a feat? The confidence to even begin a project of this magnitude is staggering. This was not a trial run, it was a deliberate attempt to create the largest single piece of stone ever worked by human hands. Such ambition does not appear overnight. It implies a long lineage of prior experience, a centuries-deep tradition of quarrying and engineering that had been perfected through successive, smaller projects. The workers and engineers at Aswan were not pioneers. They were the inheritors of a vast body of accumulated knowledge. They knew the properties of the granite, they understood the physics of leverage and transport, and they had the organizational structure to command a small army of laborers. This is where the obelisk points to a deeper mystery. The level of skill on display suggests a mature technology, one that had already passed through its experimental phases. But where is the evidence of that development? The archaeological record for the earliest dynasties is fragmentary. The unfinished obelisk forces us to consider the possibility that the most brilliant periods of Egyptian engineering that we so admire, the Great Pyramid, the temples of Carnac, may not represent the peak of their technological ability, but perhaps a later, still brilliant manifestation of a craft that had its true origins in a much earlier, now lost period. Could there have been a precursor era, a forgotten chapter of Egyptian history where these techniques were first pioneered, on projects that have since been quarried away, buried, or otherwise lost to time? The abandoned giant in the Aswan quarry is more than a failed project. It is a silent question mark, suggesting that the roots of Egyptian grandeur may run even deeper into the sands of time than we have ever dared to imagine. Moving from the colossal ambitions of Egyptian obelisks, we find ourselves in the lush river valleys of southern Costa Rica, facing a mystery of an entirely different nature. Here, hidden amongst banana plantations and jungle undergrowth, lie some of the most perfectly formed objects ever created in the ancient world. They are the stone spheres of Costa Rica, or as they are locally known, Las Bolas. These are not rough, rounded boulders. They are sculptures of astounding geometric precision, ranging in size from small, handheld orbs to colossal spheres over 2 meters in diameter, weighing several tons. To encounter one in a town square or a remote field is to be struck by a sense of profound elegance and an even deeper enigma. Their near-flawless spherical shape seems to defy the era of their creation, a silent testament to a skill that appears almost mathematical in its perfection. The story of their modern rediscovery reads like an adventure tale. In the 1930s, as the United Fruit Company was clearing vast tracts of jungle for banana plantations, their bulldozers began to uncover these strange, smooth stones. Some were damaged or moved by the heavy machinery, but many were revealed in situ, often arranged in mysterious patterns. The local workers and soon the world were captivated. Who made these spheres, and more importantly, why would a culture invest such immense effort into creating hundreds of perfectly round stones? The creators are now identified as the Dikwis culture, a pre-Columbian people who flourished in the region from roughly 600 to 1500 years after the Common Era. They were skilled artisans known for their intricate goldwork and pottery, yet the spheres represent their most enduring and puzzling legacy. The true marvel of the spheres lies in the craftsmanship. How did the Dikwis people, using only stone hammers, abrasives, and heat, achieve such a perfect spherical form? The process likely began by selecting large boulders of granodiorite, a hard, coarse-grained igneous rock. The initial shaping was probably done by carefully heating the stone and then cooling it rapidly with water, causing layers to flake off. Then came the painstaking work of pecking and grinding. Artisans would have used harder stones to pound the surface, gradually knocking off high points. Finally, they would have moved to sanding with abrasives like sand, perhaps using leather or wooden tools, for an impossibly long time to achieve the final, glass-smooth finish. The level of precision is breathtaking. Studies have shown that many of the spheres are within centimeters of being mathematically perfect spheres, a feat that would challenge a modern stonemason even with precision tools. This leads us directly to the central, haunting question: what was their purpose? The spheres did not exist in isolation. They were often found grouped together, arranged in lines, triangles, or parabolic curves, frequently in relation to the dwellings of chieftains or in key public spaces. This placement has given rise to several compelling theories. One of the most popular ideas is that they served as astronomical markers. Some arrangements have been found to align with celestial events, such as the position of the sun during solstices or equinoxes. In this view, the spheres could have functioned as a giant calendar, helping to regulate agricultural cycles and religious ceremonies, their perfect shape symbolizing the perceived perfection of the celestial bodies they tracked. Another strong possibility is that they were powerful status symbols. The sheer effort required to create the largest spheres would have been immense, a project requiring specialized artisans and a significant investment of time. For a chieftain to possess several large spheres, or to have them arranged in a complex pattern leading to his home, would have been a clear and undeniable declaration of his wealth, power, and authority. They were permanent, immovable displays of prestige, a way for emerging social elites to solidify their position in a society that was becoming increasingly stratified. Some researchers have even suggested a more esoteric function, linking the spheres to shamanic journeys or representing cosmic eggs in creation myths, their perfect form embodying concepts of wholeness and the origin of life. Yet for every theory, a challenge arises. If they were astronomical markers, why are the alignments not more consistent across different sites? If they were status symbols, why were some of the largest spheres found in remote areas, far from any obvious centers of power? The most poignant twist in the story is that by the time Spanish colonists arrived in the 16th century, the Diquis culture had already declined, and the knowledge of the sphere's purpose had been completely lost. The indigenous peoples living in the area had no memory of who made them or why. This cultural amnesia means we are left with only the silent stones themselves, their original meaning erased by time. The existence of the spheres creates a fascinating paradox within the Diquis archaeological record. While we have evidence of their sophisticated society in the form of beautiful gold ornaments and detailed pottery, the spheres represent a technological and artistic peak that seems to stand apart. The focused, almost obsessive dedication to achieving geometric perfection in stone is not mirrored in their other known works. This suggests that the spheres held a uniquely important, perhaps sacred, role in their culture, one that consumed a disproportionate amount of their creative energy. They point to a sophisticated understanding of geometry and spatial relationships that is not otherwise explicitly documented in their artifacts. The stone spheres of Costa Rica remain a beautiful and enduring puzzle, a demonstration of how a seemingly simple object, a round stone, can contain a universe of unanswered questions about the people who shaped it, their view of the world, and the secrets they took with them when their civilization faded into history. Beneath the otherworldly landscape of Cappadocia, Turkey, where fairy chimneys and rock-cut churches dot the surface, lies a hidden world of even greater magnitude. While visitors marvel at the sights above ground, the true marvel is concealed deep within the soft, malleable volcanic rock, known as tuff. This is the Derinkuyu underground city, an engineering masterpiece that plunges 18 levels deep into the earth, a subterranean metropolis capable of sheltering an astonishing 20,000 people for extended periods. This was not a simple cave or a temporary refuge. It was a fully functional, self-contained city, complete with everything a massive population would need to survive a long-term siege, hidden from the world above. The complexity of Derinkuyu is almost beyond comprehension. Imagine a vast, multi-level labyrinth stretching hundreds of feet downward, with narrow, sloping corridors connecting a bewildering array of rooms. There were living quarters for families, spacious communal kitchens, wine and oil presses, stables for livestock, churches with carved crosses adorning the walls, and even a missionary school. Crucially, the city featured an ingenious ventilation system of over 50 carefully engineered shafts that brought fresh air to even the deepest levels. Deep wells tapped into the groundwater, providing a secure and independent water supply that could not be poisoned by an enemy on the surface. The entrances were protected by massive, millstone-shaped doors, enormous discs of rock that could be rolled into place to seal each passage, making the city virtually impregnable. For a long time, the prevailing narrative attributed the construction of Derinkuyu entirely to early Christians, particularly Byzantine monks and communities seeking refuge from Roman persecution in the first few centuries after the Common Era. There is certainly strong evidence for this use. The chapels and Christian symbols are clear markers of their presence. However, this explanation only tells part of the story, and a more recent one at that. The sheer, staggering scale of the complex suggests a much longer and more complex history. Carving out an 18-level city by hand, even in soft rock, is a project that would have taken generations, if not centuries, of continuous labor. It is unlikely that a persecuted Christian community arriving in the area would have had the time, resources, or manpower to undertake such a colossal project from scratch while simultaneously evading their enemies. This is where the mystery deepens considerably. Many archaeologists and historians now believe that the Christians were not the original architects, but rather the inheritors and expanders of a much older subterranean refuge. They likely discovered a pre-existing network of tunnels and chambers, perhaps dating back to the Hittite era over 3,000 years ago or even earlier. The Hittites were a powerful Bronze Age empire that dominated Anatolia, and they were known to carve rock shelters. Who exactly began this monumental task and why remains one of the greatest unanswered questions about Derinkuyu. What kind of threat could have been so pervasive, so terrifying, that it motivated an entire society to literally move underground, investing immense effort into creating a permanent hidden world? The answer may lie in periods of great, unknown upheaval that swept across Anatolia. This region has always been a crossroads of civilizations and a battleground for empires. Long before the Romans, it was invaded by the Phrygians, the Cimmerians, and the Persians. Each wave of conflict could have driven local populations to seek safety beneath the earth. The underground city may have been started as a response to a specific catastrophic event, a threat so severe that it necessitated a permanent, collective solution. The original builders might have been a people whose name is lost to history, a culture that faced an existential crisis and responded with one of the most ambitious survival projects ever conceived. This idea of a deep, prehistoric origin transforms Derinkuyu from a remarkable historical site into a potential piece of a much larger puzzle. It suggests that the human impulse to hide from cataclysm is not a medieval or classical phenomenon, but a primordial one. The city's deepest, most ancient levels could date back to a time of great climatic shift or a forgotten invasion, a period of upheaval so profound that it forced a technological leap into the underworld. Derinkuyu stands as a silent stone testament to resilience, a monument built not to the glory of gods or kings, but to the sheer, desperate will to survive. It hints that the true history of this region is layered, not just in the rock, but in time itself, with each generation adding its own chapter to a sanctuary that may have been old when the first Christians arrived. From the hidden depths of Derinkuyu, we now emerge into the open, sun-drenched landscape of southern Africa, where a different kind of fortress stands as a testament to ingenuity and power. Rising dramatically from a granite hilltop in what is now modern-day Zimbabwe, the ruins known simply as Great Zimbabwe represent the single largest ancient structure found anywhere on the continent south of the Sahara Desert. This is not a site that whispers its secrets, it proclaims them with towering, curvaceous walls of precisely fitted stone, a majestic complex that was the thriving heart of a wealthy and sophisticated kingdom for over 4 centuries, from the 11th to the 15th centuries of the Common Era. The scale of the site is immediately breathtaking. It is divided into 3 main architectural ensembles, each telling a different part of the story. The hill complex, perched on the highest point, is thought to have been the spiritual and ceremonial center, a place of ritual and royal authority. Below it lies the great enclosure, an immense oval wall that is the iconic image of the site. This wall is a masterpiece of dry stone construction, soaring over 30 feet high and stretching nearly 800 feet in circumference, built entirely without mortar. Inside, a smaller, conical tower stands as a mystery, its solid fill suggesting a symbolic rather than a functional purpose, perhaps representing a grain silo of abundance or a phallic symbol of fertility. Further out, the valley ruins comprise a sprawling network of smaller stone enclosures that would have been the bustling residential and artistic hub for the city's elite and its skilled artisans. Together, these structures formed the capital of the Shona people, a kingdom that grew immensely powerful through its control of a vast intercontinental trade network. The true source of Great Zimbabwe's wealth and influence lay not in conquest but in commerce. The kingdom sat at the crossroads of trade routes that stretched from the interior of Africa all the way to the coasts of the Indian Ocean. From the inland regions, caravans brought gold, ivory, and copper. At the coast, Arab and Swahili merchants arrived in their dhows, eager to trade for these precious commodities, offering in return fine Persian ceramics, colorful glass beads from India, and even fragments of Chinese celadon pottery. Great Zimbabwe was the central exchange point, the economic engine that managed this flow of goods. The rulers of this land grew fabulously wealthy by taxing the trade, and the archaeological evidence is clear. Excavations have unearthed a wealth of these imported luxury goods, proving the city's deep integration into the medieval global economy. This was not an isolated tribal settlement. It was a cosmopolitan capital connected to the wider world. The most enduring and impressive legacy of Great Zimbabwe, however, is its architecture. The technique of dry stone walling, where stones are carefully selected and shaped to fit together perfectly without any binding agent, is raised to an art form here. The walls are not just functional, they are decorative and structurally brilliant. The most prestigious sections feature chevron and herringbone patterns created by the careful alignment of different colored stones. The curves of the walls are graceful and seamless, and the stability of these towering structures, which have endured for over 600 years, is a testament to the advanced engineering knowledge of the builders. This was not a skill learned from outsiders. It was a uniquely African innovation, developed and perfected over generations to suit the local materials and aesthetic sensibilities. Yet for generations, the magnificence of Great Zimbabwe posed an uncomfortable problem for European colonists who arrived in the region in the late 19th century. Confronted with such a sophisticated stone city, their deeply ingrained prejudices and racist ideologies made it impossible for them to accept that indigenous Africans could have been the architects. They concocted a series of fantastical theories to explain away the ruins, attributing them to anyone but the local Shona people. The most persistent myth was that the site was the work of the Phoenicians, a seafaring people from the Mediterranean, or perhaps the Queen of Sheba, or even King Solomon's mines. These colonial narratives were a deliberate attempt to strip Africa of its history, to justify conquest by portraying the continent as a land without a past, waiting for European civilization to arrive and bring it into the light of history. The reclamation of Great Zimbabwe's true history is a story of archaeological integrity triumphing over prejudice. As proper scientific excavations were conducted in the 20th century, the evidence became undeniable. The artifacts found at the site, the continuity of cultural practices with the local Shona people, and carbon dating of materials all pointed conclusively to an indigenous origin. The name Zimbabwe itself comes from the Shona words Dizimba Mabwe, which simply means houses of stone. The modern nation of Zimbabwe, upon gaining independence, proudly adopted this name and the symbol of the soapstone bird sculptures found at the site for its national flag. The discovery and correct attribution of Great Zimbabwe forced a profound and necessary re-evaluation of African history. It provided irrefutable proof that powerful, centralized, and technologically advanced kingdoms flourished in sub-Saharan Africa long before the first European ships rounded the Cape of Good Hope. It stands as a monumental rebuke to colonial myths, a stone-built declaration that African civilizations were not waiting in the wings of history. They were already center stage, building empires and trading with the world. Imagine standing on the dusty, wind-swept plains of southern Peru, seeing nothing but a vast, stony desert stretching to the horizon. The ground beneath your feet is a canvas of dark, reddish-brown pebbles, and from your vantage point, the landscape appears largely featureless. It is only when you ascend, when you rise high above the earth in an aircraft, that the true magic of this place is revealed. Spread across nearly 200 square miles of the Nazca Desert are one of the world's most breathtaking and perplexing archaeological wonders, the Nazca Lines. These are not mere scratches on the ground. They are monumental geoglyphs, giant designs created by the simple, yet brilliant, act of removing the top layer of dark stones to reveal the lighter, clay-rich soil beneath. This contrast creates lines that can stretch for miles, forming shapes so immense and precise that their full glory can only be appreciated from the heavens. We see a hummingbird with a beak as long as a football field, a spider with perfectly articulated legs, a condor with wings outstretched, a monkey with a spiraling tail, and dozens of other creatures, alongside geometric shapes like trapezoids, triangles, and spirals that crisscross the desert floor in an intricate, seemingly chaotic, yet undoubtedly deliberate pattern. The creators of this vast open-air gallery were the Nazca people, a culture that flourished in the region from around 500 years before the Common Era to 500 years after. They were skilled potters and irrigation engineers, managing to survive in an incredibly arid environment by tapping into underground aquifers. But their most enduring legacy is this collection of geoglyphs, a project that required a sustained, multi-generational effort. The method of creation was straightforward in theory but staggering in its execution. The Nazca artists, working without the benefit of flight, would first design their figures on a smaller scale. Then, using simple surveying techniques, perhaps employing long ropes, wooden stakes, and a profound understanding of basic geometry, they would scale up these designs onto the desert pavement. Teams of workers would then carefully remove the dark surface stones, piling them along the edges of the lines to accentuate the contrast. The incredible stability of the Nazca Desert, with its minimal rainfall and lack of strong winds, has acted as a perfect preservative, allowing these delicate artworks to survive for over 2,000 years. This very method of creation leads us directly to the central, haunting question that has captivated explorers and researchers since the lines were first properly documented from the air in the 1920s. What was their purpose? Why would a culture invest such immense effort into creating magnificent images that they themselves could never fully see? The most enduring theory, championed by the German mathematician Maria Reich, who dedicated her life to studying the lines, is that they functioned as a gigantic astronomical calendar. Reich proposed that many of the lines pointed directly to the rising and setting points of the sun, moon, and significant stars on the horizon during solstices and equinoxes. In this view, the desert was transformed into a colossal observatory, its alignments helping the Nazca people track the passing seasons, which was crucial for determining optimal planting and harvest times in their precarious environment. The animal shapes, then, might have represented constellations or deities associated with specific celestial events. A second, compelling theory suggests the lines were ritual pathways integral to religious ceremonies. According to this idea, the geometric shapes, particularly the long, straight lines and large trapezoids, served as sacred avenues for processions. Participants would walk along these paths during rituals, perhaps leading to a central platform or altar. The act of walking the figure of a spider or a bird could have been a form of sympathetic magic, a way to invoke the power of that animal spirit for fertility, water, or a successful hunt. This theory is supported by the discovery of ceramic shards and other offerings at the endpoints of some lines, indicating they were sites of ritual activity. The fact that the figures are best viewed from above has led to a more speculative yet popular notion that they were messages or offerings intended for gods in the sky, who would look down and see the devotion of the Nazca people etched into the earth. The precision and sheer scale of the Nazca lines point to a level of social organization and technical skill that is deeply impressive. Creating a perfectly straight line that runs for several miles across uneven terrain is no simple feat. It requires not only advanced surveying knowledge but also a powerful, centralized authority that could plan, coordinate, and direct a long-term project involving a significant portion of the population. This was not the work of a few isolated villages. It was a society-wide endeavor that must have been woven into the very fabric of Nazca culture and identity. The sustained effort over centuries indicates that the purpose of the lines was absolutely fundamental to their worldview, a core belief system that justified the immense investment of time and labor. Perhaps the most poignant aspect of the Nazca lines is that the culture that created them left no written records to explain their actions. We are left to interpret their intentions through the silent, sprawling symbols they left behind. This forces us to confront the limitations of our own understanding. The lines represent a complex worldview, a fusion of art, astronomy, religion, and engineering that is now lost to us. They are a powerful reminder that ancient cultures possessed sophisticated knowledge systems that we are only beginning to decipher. The true meaning of the Nazca lines may not be a single answer, but a combination of all these theories, a sacred landscape that served as both a practical calendar and a spiritual bridge between the human world and the cosmos. They stand as a testament to the human desire to make sense of our place in the universe, to leave a mark so grand that it would endure long after our own voices have fallen silent. Far out in the vast expanse of the Pacific Ocean, over 2,000 miles from the nearest inhabited land, lies one of the most isolated pieces of territory on Earth. This is Rapa Nui, known to the world as Easter Island, and it is home to a mystery that has captivated the human imagination for centuries. The iconic Moai statues, with their brooding, elongated faces and solemn expressions, are instantly recognizable. For generations, these stone giants were known primarily as massive heads, their features staring out from the hillsides as if they had grown from the earth itself. But recent archaeological work has completely upended this popular image, revealing a truth that is far more fascinating and profound. These are not just heads. They have full, complete bodies, buried up to their shoulders in the very ground from which they were carved. This discovery opens up a deeper chapter in the story of Rapa Nui, a story of incredible achievement, staggering ambition, and a sobering lesson about the delicate balance between a society and its environment. The process of excavating these buried moai has been like peeling back the layers of time. At the main quarry of Roroku, a volcanic crater that served as the primary workshop for the statue builders, archaeologists have carefully dug around the bases of several moai. What they have uncovered is astonishing. The statues possess broad shoulders, torsos with detailed backs, arms with delicately carved hands resting on their stomachs, and even intricate designs that appear to be tattoos or loincloths etched across their lower backs. Some of these subterranean bodies are truly colossal, with full heights reaching over 30 feet and weights estimated at over 80 tons. Seeing them in their entirety transforms them from simple stone faces into powerful, full-bodied figures, giving them a presence and a personality that the iconic head and shoulders view could never convey. The reason for their burial is now understood to be a slow, natural process of erosion and sediment accumulation over the centuries, rather than a deliberate act of interment, effectively hiding their true form from the world until modern science could reveal it. This revelation only deepens the central mystery that has surrounded Easter Island for so long. How did a small, isolated population, numbering at its peak perhaps only 12 to 15,000 people, accomplish such a monumental feat? The transportation of these multi-ton statues from the quarry at Roroku to their final ceremonial platforms, known as ahu, scattered around the island's coastline, is a puzzle that has sparked intense and creative debate. The islanders had no metal tools, no wheels, and no draft animals. The traditional explanation, supported by local oral history, is that the statues were walked upright to their destinations. This theory, popularized by researchers like Terry Hunt and Carl Lipo, suggests that teams of rope pullers would rock the statue from side to side, inching it forward in a careful, controlled shuffle. Experiments with smaller replicas have shown this method to be surprisingly feasible with careful coordination, turning a multi-ton block of stone into a ponderous, walking giant. However, other theories persist. Some researchers propose the use of a system of wooden sledges or rollers, pulling the statues along lubricated tracks made from the island's native palm trees. Another compelling idea involves a technique known as parbuckling, where the statue would be laid on its back on a sledge and then pulled up a ramp using ropes wound around a large post. Each theory has its merits and its drawbacks, and it is possible that different methods were used at different times. What is undeniable is the sheer level of social organization required. Moving a single moai would have required the coordinated effort of hundreds of people, all working in harmony under the direction of skilled engineers. This points to a highly structured society with a powerful ruling class, likely priest kings or clan chiefs, who could command the labor and resources necessary for these grand projects. The moai were not just art, they were profound expressions of religious and political power, believed to represent deified ancestors who watched over the living community. But the most haunting part of the Easter Island story is its devastating conclusion. The society that possessed the organizational genius to erect nearly 900 of these statues eventually collapsed. The prevailing narrative, which serves as a stark parable for our own times, points to ecological devastation. When Polynesian settlers first arrived on the island around 1200 years after the Common Era, it was covered in a lush forest of giant palm trees. This ecosystem was the lifeblood of the society, providing wood for canoes for fishing, materials for building homes, and crucially, the rollers and levers needed to transport the moe. As the population grew and the statue-building culture reached its peak, the trees were cut down at an unsustainable rate. The evidence suggests a tragic progression. Without trees, the soil eroded, making it difficult to grow crops. Without large canoes, deep-sea fishing became impossible, cutting off a vital food source. The society fractured, descending into clan warfare. The very symbols of their power, the moe, were toppled from their platforms in internecine conflict. The story of Rapa Nui is a powerful and cautionary tale about a society that, in its drive to create monumental expressions of faith and power, may have inadvertently sabotaged the very foundation of its own survival. It is a testament to human ingenuity in the face of extreme isolation, but also a sobering reminder of the fragility of even the most organized civilizations when they become disconnected from the limits of their environment. The moe, with their newly revealed bodies, stand as silent witnesses to this cycle of rise and fall. Their buried forms a poignant symbol of a culture that reached for the sky, only to have the ground literally rise up around them. While the colossal stone figures of Easter Island stand as a stark warning about isolation and resource depletion, our search for lost civilizations now takes us to a vast sea of sand where the mystery is not in what we can see, but in what remains stubbornly hidden. The Kalahari Desert, stretching across much of Botswana and into Namibia and South Africa, presents a landscape that seems to defy the very idea of a city. Its endless, rolling dunes and sparse, dry vegetation suggest a place that has always been a barren wilderness. Yet, for more than 100 years, an alluring legend has persisted, a tale whispered among explorers and etched into the pages of old journals. The story of a magnificent lost city, a place sometimes called the City of the Kalahari or the Ruins of Ganawa. The origins of this legend are as hazy as the desert heat shimmer. They trace back to the accounts of early European explorers and big game hunters who ventured into the uncharted interior of southern Africa in the 19th century. These men returned with stories heard from local San Bushman communities, tales of a great settlement built of stone, now swallowed by the sands. The most famous account comes from the Canadian explorer Guillermo Farini, who claimed in 1885 to have discovered extensive stone ruins in the desert, describing walls laid out in semicircles and arcs, and structures that were clearly not natural formations. He even published a book with sketches, sparking a wave of public fascination. Subsequent expeditions were launched to find Farini's city, but none could ever relocate the precise site he described. Skeptics argued that he had likely seen a peculiar geological formation, a collection of dolerite slabs that had fractured into rectangular shapes, and his imagination had done the rest. The legend was largely dismissed by the academic world as a classic example of a desert mirage, a fantasy born from wishful thinking and the misinterpretation of natural rock outcrops. Yet the story refused to die. The idea was simply too powerful. What if the Kalahari was not always a desert? This question is the key that unlocks the entire mystery. We now know, through the science of paleoclimatology, that the African continent has undergone dramatic climatic shifts over thousands of years. The Kalahari is not a static environment. it has experienced multiple periods of much wetter weather, known as pluvial periods. During these times, which correspond with the end of the last ice age around 12,000 years ago and again in more recent millennia, the desert would have been transformed into a vast, lush savanna. Ancient river systems, now long dry, would have flowed across the landscape, supporting abundant wildlife and creating ideal conditions for human settlement. What is today an arid expanse of sand was once a green and potentially fertile land, capable of supporting large populations of hunter-gatherers and possibly even early agricultural or pastoral societies. This scientific understanding has completely reframed the search for the lost city. Modern explorers are no longer just trudging across dunes with a map from the 1800s. Instead, they are using the eyes of satellites orbiting the Earth. Satellite imagery and ground-penetrating radar have revealed a hidden geography beneath the Kalahari's surface. Scientists have mapped the ghostly outlines of ancient river channels and vast, now dry lake beds, confirming the paleoclimatic data. More tantalizingly, these advanced technologies have identified numerous anomalies, geometric patterns, and subsurface features that look distinctly unnatural, suggesting the possibility of human-made structures buried deep beneath the sand. These are not the clearly defined walls of a medieval city, but they are enough to suggest that something significant, something built by human hands, may indeed lie hidden. This shifts the legend from pure myth into the realm of a compelling historical hypothesis. The lost city of the Kalahari may not have been a stone-built metropolis in the European sense, with castles and cobbled streets. It might have been a major center of a different kind. Imagine a powerful trading empire that controlled the flow of goods, ivory, gold, ostrich feathers, and salt across the green savanna, a hub connecting Central Africa to the southern coast. Or perhaps it was a large agricultural society that cultivated the fertile lands along those now vanished rivers, managing water with sophisticated techniques long before outside influences arrived. Such a society would have left behind more than just stone walls. There would be middens of pottery, tools, and evidence of animal domestication, all waiting to be discovered. The true significance of this search, therefore, is not just about finding a single set of ruins. It is about challenging the persistent narrative that sub-Saharan Africa lacked complex, centralized societies before a certain date. The discovery of Great Zimbabwe already shattered one version of this myth, but what if Zimbabwe was not an isolated phenomenon? What if it was part of a much broader tapestry of urbanization and state formation across southern Africa? A tapestry whose other threads have been erased by a changing climate. The relentless desert sands of the Kalahari may be preserving the evidence of a forgotten chapter, a trading empire or a sophisticated culture that thrived during a green age and then vanished when the rains failed, its story preserved only in fragile oral traditions and the stubborn, unverified reports of a few determined explorers. The lost city remains elusive, but the possibility that it exists forces us to redraw the historical map of an entire continent, imagining a past where the great deserts were not barriers, but cradles of civilization. But the enigmatic structure off Yonaguni is far from the only underwater puzzle in Japanese waters. If we travel further north to the Ryukyu archipelago and the waters surrounding the island of Okinawa, we enter a zone of even deeper and more controversial discoveries. Here, at various sites with names like Yonaguni's nearby, Ice-Key Point, and the mysterious formations near the Kurama Islands, divers and researchers have reported sighting what can only be described as monumental architecture on the seafloor. The descriptions are astonishing: vast, stepped platforms that resemble the ziggurats of Mesopotamia, wide, flat terraces that look like paved plazas, and what appear to be the foundations of massive stone structures, all lying in the silent, blue gloom at depths that defy simple explanation. The most compelling of these sites features a massive, layered structure that many observers immediately label a pyramid. Unlike the smooth-sided pyramids of Egypt, this would be a stepped pyramid, composed of what seem to be enormous stone blocks arranged in ascending tiers. The edges appear sharp and straight, the angles suspiciously regular. Surrounding this central formation are other anomalous features: long, straight roads or walls, large circular depressions that could be ceremonial pits or reservoirs, and even what some claim are carved archways and staircases leading to higher levels. The scale is truly monumental, suggesting a complex that would have been a dominant feature of the landscape when it was above water. The sheer size and apparent organization of these structures push the boundaries of what we can easily attribute to random geological processes. As with the Yonaguni Monument, the scientific community is sharply divided over the origin of the Okinawa formations. Skeptics, primarily geologists, propose a natural explanation centered on the region's unique and volatile geology. Japan sits at the convergence of several tectonic plates, an area subject to intense seismic activity. This can fracture sandstone and other sedimentary rocks along straight plains, creating the illusion of carved blocks. Furthermore, the phenomenon of sheet jointing can cause large slabs of rock to separate naturally, forming step-like terraces. Over thousands of years, powerful ocean currents could then erode these fractured surfaces, smoothing edges and enhancing the artificial appearance. From this perspective, the sunken pyramids are a spectacular example of nature's ability to mimic human art, a grand geological coincidence. However, proponents of the man-made theory counter with a host of detailed observations that are difficult to dismiss. They point to features that seem to have no clear natural analog. For instance, the presence of what look like precisely drilled holes in certain stones, or the way some of the massive blocks appear to be fitted together with smaller stones acting as chocks or stabilizers, a technique seen in other ancient megalithic sites around the world. They also note the arrangement of the structures themselves. The terraces and pyramids are often aligned with cardinal directions or with significant astronomical events, a hallmark of intentional human design across cultures. The clustering of these seemingly architectural features in one area, rather than being scattered randomly, also suggests a planned layout. The most critical piece of evidence, however, is the depth at which these structures are found. Many of the most significant formations lie submerged between 100 and 150 feet below the current sea level. We know with great certainty that sea levels were dramatically lower during the peak of the last ice age. Around 20,000 years ago, so much water was locked in polar ice caps that the sea level was about 400 feet lower than it is today. This means that the area where these underwater structures now lie would have been dry land, part of a vast coastal plain that connected many of the Japanese islands to the Asian mainland. This places the potential construction date of these sites in a truly remote epoch, a time when, according to conventional history, the dominant culture in Japan was the Jomon period. The Jomon people are known to us through their distinctive chord-pattern pottery, some of the oldest in the world. They were a sophisticated hunter-gatherer society with complex spiritual beliefs, but nothing in the terrestrial archaeological record suggests they were building massive stone pyramids or ziggurats. Their structures were made of wood and earth, which rarely survive millennia. If the Okinawa formations are indeed man-made, it forces a radical reassessment of the Jomon culture. It would suggest they possessed a level of social organization and architectural knowledge far beyond what we have ever attributed to them. Alternatively, these structures could point to an even older pre-Jomon culture, a people who inhabited this lost coastal plain during an earlier, warmer interglacial period, only to see their world swallowed by the sea as the glaciers advanced once more. The silence of the deep holds the answer, a secret that could rewrite the entire early history of Japan and its place in the ancient world. While the sunken structures of Japan hint at coastal civilizations lost to the waves, our journey now takes us to a different kind of revelation, one found not beneath the ocean, but nestled in a dry desert valley on the other side of the Pacific. For a long time, the narrative of civilization in the Americas followed a familiar script. The story began with the Olmecs of Mexico around 1500 years before the Common Era, with their colossal heads and grand ceremonial centers, and then moved south to the Chavin culture in the Andes, which emerged around 900 years before the Common Era. This timeline provided a comfortable, linear progression. But then, in the 1990s, a discovery in the Supe Valley of Peru shattered that narrative completely. The sacred city of Caral, with its monumental pyramids and sophisticated urban planning, was carbon dated to an astonishing 2,600 years before the Common Era. This single finding forced a dramatic rewrite of history, pushing back the dawn of Andean civilization by a full 1,000 years and establishing Caral as the oldest known center of civilization in all of the Americas. To walk through the ruins of Caral today is to witness the birth of a social experiment on a grand scale. The city is laid out with a clear and deliberate design, covering over 150 acres. At its heart are 6 large pyramidal structures, massive earth and stone platforms that dominate the skyline. The largest of these, the Pyramid Maya, stands 60 feet high and measures nearly 500 feet across at its base. Flanking these great mounds are 2 sunken circular plazas, elegant amphitheaters carved down into the earth, their perfect circles suggesting a profound understanding of geometry and public space. Surrounding this central ceremonial core are distinct residential neighborhoods, with the homes of the elite situated closer to the temples and more modest dwellings for craftspeople and laborers spread out around them. This was not a haphazard village that grew over time. It was a fully planned city, a complex society that emerged seemingly fully formed, with a clear vision of its own identity and purpose. What makes Caral truly revolutionary, however, is not just its age or its architecture, but the story its stones do not tell. In sharp contrast to nearly every other early civilization we have studied, from Mesopotamia to Egypt to later cultures in the Americas, Caral shows a complete absence of any signs of warfare. Archaeologists have searched in vain for the telltale markers of conflict. There are no defensive walls, no ramparts, no fortified gates. The weapons unearthed are simple hunting tools, not instruments of war. There are no mass graves containing victims of violence, no depictions of conquered enemies in their art, no evidence of a ruling class that glorified military prowess. For a civilization that thrived for nearly 1,000 years, a span of time longer than the Roman Empire, this peaceful existence is not just remarkable, it is virtually unique in the ancient world. This evidence points toward a society organized around a completely different set of principles. The power at Caral seems to have been rooted not in fear and coercion, but in religion, trade, and intellectual achievement. The rulers were likely priest astronomers who derived their authority from their ability to predict the seasons, manage water resources, and mediate with the gods. The city's economy was not based on plunder but on a sophisticated network of trade that reached far beyond the Supe Valley. Excavations have uncovered evidence of trade goods like spondylus shells from the warm waters of Ecuador, used in rituals, and dyes from the Amazonian jungle. This suggests that Caral was the heart of a vast, peaceful exchange network, where knowledge, goods, and ideas flowed freely, connecting the coast, the highlands, and the jungle in a symbiotic relationship. The cultural life of Carol's inhabitants was rich and complex. Among the most fascinating discoveries are a collection of 32 flutes, meticulously crafted from the bones of pelicans and condors, and 37 cornets made from the bones of llamas or deer. These were not crude noisemakers, they were sophisticated musical instruments, each decorated with intricate carvings of birds, monkeys, and other animals. This reveals a society that valued art, music, and ceremony, using these expressions to forge a collective identity and connect with the spiritual world. The absence of conflict allowed this culture to flourish, directing its energy and resources not toward building armies, but toward constructing monumental architecture, advancing astronomical knowledge, and creating beautiful art. The ultimate fate of Carol is as mysterious as its peaceful origins. Around 2,000 years before the Common Era, the city was carefully abandoned. There are no signs of invasion or sudden disaster. Instead, it appears the people simply left, taking their belongings with them and sealing certain important structures with a layer of stone and earth, as if preparing for a future return that never happened. The most likely explanation points to climate change. A prolonged drought or a shift in the flow of the Soup River may have made agriculture unsustainable, forcing the population to disperse into smaller, more resilient communities throughout the region. The knowledge, the culture, and the social models developed at Carol did not vanish. They likely spread and evolved, influencing the cultures that would follow, like the Chavin. But the unique, sustained peace of the Carol civilization itself came to an end. Carol stands as a powerful and provocative counterpoint to the standard narrative of human history, which often assumes that hierarchy, centralization, and warfare are inseparable parts of the rise of civilization. This ancient city in the Peruvian desert presents us with a different model, a proof of concept that a large, complex, and enduring society can be built on cooperation, trade, and shared spiritual belief. It hints at a lost peaceful age, a 1,000-year period where human ingenuity was channeled into creation rather than destruction. The silent, sun-baked pyramids of Carol ask us a profound question. Was our violent path through history an inevitability, or was it merely one choice among other, more harmonious possibilities that we have since forgotten? While the Nazca lines of Peru capture the world's imagination, a similar, yet uniquely American, mystery lies etched into the desert floor of the American Southwest. In the stark, sun-baked landscape of the Colorado Desert, along the lower Colorado River near the town of Blythe, California, the Earth itself has been transformed into a gallery of giants. These are the Blythe intaglios, a collection of massive geoglyphs so immense that their full form can only be comprehended from the air. Imagine figures of humans, animals, and geometric shapes, some stretching over 160 feet in length, created not by piling stones, but by the careful, deliberate act of scraping away the dark, weathered surface pebbles to reveal the lighter, sandy soil beneath. This technique creates a striking contrast, turning the desert into a colossal canvas for figures that have silently watched over the landscape for centuries. The creators of these impressive earthworks are believed to be the ancestors of the modern Mojave and Quechan peoples, Native American cultures whose history is deeply intertwined with the Colorado River. Unlike the grand stone cities of Mesoamerica or the complex mounds of the Mississippi Valley, the Blythe intaglios represent a different kind of monumentality, one that is expansive and integrated directly into the landscape itself. The process of their creation was deceptively simple but would have required significant communal effort. Teams of people would have carefully removed the top layer of desert pavement, the desert varnish of dark rocks to expose the light-colored subsurface. The resulting lines are shallow, only a few inches deep, yet they have endured thanks to the arid climate and the stability of the desert floor. This endurance is a testament to the skill of the artists who understood their materials and environment perfectly. Determining the precise age of the intaglios has proven challenging. There are no organic materials embedded within the lines themselves that can be carbon dated. However, archaeologists have used a technique called surface exposure dating, analyzing how long the newly exposed soil has been subject to weathering. These studies suggest that some of the figures could be remarkably ancient, possibly over 1,000 years old, with creation occurring in stages between 900 and 1,200 years after the Common Era. This places their origin in a time when these riverine cultures were flourishing, developing complex social structures and rich spiritual traditions along the life-giving waters of the Colorado. The most captivating question, of course, is why they were made. Their immense scale, designed for a vantage point that only birds or spirits could naturally enjoy, points overwhelmingly to a sacred, ceremonial purpose. Among the most prominent figures is a distinct human shape, often interpreted as a representation of Mastamho, the central creator god and cultural hero of the Mojave people. Another striking glyph depicts a mountain lion, a powerful animal spirit. According to Mojave oral tradition, these intaglios were created to mark the place where their people came into existence, a sacred landscape where the events of their creation stories unfolded. The geoglyphs were not mere pictures, they were active sites of ritual where ceremonies, dances, and prayers would be performed to maintain the balance of the world, honor the ancestors, and connect the community to the spiritual realm. The figures served as a permanent reminder of their mythology, an immense storybook written on the land itself. The discovery of the Blythe intaglios by the wider world is a relatively recent chapter in their long history. While known to local indigenous communities for millennia, they were first documented by outsiders in 1932, when a pilot flying a mail route from Las Vegas to Blythe spotted the startling figures from the air. This method of discovery highlights a crucial parallel with the Nazca lines. Both are artistic expressions whose full impact is dependent on an aerial perspective. This raises fascinating questions about the worldview of the creators. Did they conceive of their gods as looking down from above? Were the figures intended as messages or offerings to celestial beings? Or was the act of creating something so vast that it could only be fully appreciated by the cosmos itself a fundamental part of its spiritual power? The Blythe intaglios force us to consider a concept of art and ritual that is not confined to human-scale perception, but is designed to engage with the entire expanse of the visible world. These geoglyphs stand as a powerful testament to the sophisticated and complex cultural landscape of pre-Columbian North America. For too long, the history of the continent's indigenous peoples was viewed through a narrow lens, often overlooking the diversity of their intellectual and artistic achievements beyond the most obvious archaeological sites. The Blythe intaglios are not fortifications or palaces. They are monuments of thought, religion, and identity. They reveal a deep connection to the land, a sophisticated understanding of scale and design, and a rich ceremonial life that shaped the very earth. Their presence reminds us that vast portions of the North American continent hold secrets that remain unrecorded on modern maps, their stories waiting to be understood not through excavation, but through a respectful engagement with the living traditions of the people for whom this desert canvas was and remains a sacred space. Now we turn our attention from monumental ruins to a different kind of mystery altogether, one found not in stone but in ink. The ancient Egyptians were meticulous record keepers, and their temples and tombs are filled with hieroglyphic accounts of their history, their gods, and their interactions with the world. Among these records, one name appears with recurring fascination and reverence: the land of Punt. This was not an enemy to be conquered, but a partner to be revered, a distant, almost mythical kingdom that the Egyptians called God's land. The historical evidence for Punt is both rich and frustrating. We know it existed because the Egyptians wrote about it in glowing terms, describing lavish trading expeditions that returned with treasures beyond imagination. Yet, for all this detailed documentation, the actual location of Punt remains one of history's most enduring and tantalizing puzzles, a ghost on the map of the ancient world. The importance of Punt to Egyptian civilization cannot be overstated. Think of it as the ancient equivalent of a source of rare earth minerals or luxury, goods essential for a superpower's economy and culture. The shopping lists from these expeditions, meticulously recorded on temple walls, are a catalogue of exotic wealth. The Egyptians prized the fragrant resins of frankincense and myrrh, essential for temple rituals and the embalming process, and Punt was their primary source. They sought ebony wood, a deep, dark hardwood that symbolized power and eternity, used for fine furniture and religious statues. They acquired gold, the flesh of the gods themselves, and leopard skins for the robes of high priests. But perhaps the most telling imports were the living things: baboons, giraffes, and even pygmies, who were likely brought back for their skill in ritual dance. These were not just goods, they were symbols of a connection to a distant, magical land, a place of abundance that supplied the very materials that defined Egyptian religious and royal life. We even have a visual idea of what Punt looked like, thanks to the most famous account of all, found in the mortuary temple of the female pharaoh Hatshepsut at Deir el-Bahri. A magnificent series of reliefs depicts her expedition in stunning detail. We see the Egyptian ships setting sail down the Red Sea, arriving at a foreign shore and engaging in trade. The artists took great care to show the distinctiveness of the Puntite people and their environment. We see their houses, which are described as beehive-shaped huts built on stilts above the water, a clear adaptation to a coastal or riverine environment. We are introduced to the ruler of Punt, a man named Parahu, who is depicted with a distinctively portly figure, and his wife, Queen Ati, whose appearance was so unusual to the Egyptian artists, perhaps due to steatopygia, a genetic trait involving accumulated fat on the hips, that they rendered her with a level of realism that borders on caricature. These details are priceless, offering a snapshot of a culture that was clearly sophisticated and unique, and yet this very evidence is the core of the mystery. Despite knowing what their trading partners looked like and what they traded, we still cannot pinpoint where they lived. The problem is that the Egyptian descriptions, while vivid, are geographically vague. They referred to Punt as being to the south and accessible by sea, but south could mean a vast area. For over a century, scholars have debated the location, with theories primarily clustering in two regions. One school of thought places Punt in the Horn of Africa, in modern-day Somalia, Eritrea, or eastern Ethiopia. This argument is supported by the types of goods acquired. Frankincense and myrrh trees are native to this region, and the depiction of animals like giraffes. The stilt house architecture also fits with communities along the African coast. The competing theory argues for a location in southern Arabia, in what is now Yemen. Proponents of this view point to ancient references that sometimes distinguish Punt from other African lands, and note that the incense trees also grow there. They suggest the Egyptians may have crossed the Red Sea to trade, rather than sailing down the African coast. The true significance of the Punt mystery, however, goes far beyond an academic debate over ancient geography. The fact that a kingdom so vital to one of history's most documented civilizations can simply vanish from our modern maps is a humbling lesson. It forces us to confront the vast gaps in our knowledge of ancient interregional trade. We tend to think of the ancient world as a collection of isolated river valleys, but the connection to Punt reveals a complex, long-distance network of maritime trade that flourished for millennia. This was not a simple barter between neighbors. It was an organized, state-sponsored enterprise involving large ships, skilled navigators, and diplomatic relations with a far-off land. The inability to find Punt suggests that our archaeological record is profoundly skewed. We have found the stone monuments of the Egyptians, but the ports, trading posts, and even the capital of Punt itself may have been built from perishable materials like wood and thatch, perfectly suited to their environment but destined to rot away without a trace. This leads to the most profound implication of the lost kingdom of Punt. It stands as powerful evidence for the possibility of sophisticated and wealthy civilizations that have left behind no grand ruins for us to discover. We are conditioned to look for pyramids, ziggurats, and stone walls as proof of a complex society. But what about a civilization whose greatness was based not on monumental architecture, but on control of trade routes, mastery of sailing, and the production of high-value, perishable goods like incense? Such a society could have been immensely influential, its merchants known from the Mediterranean to the Indian Ocean, yet its physical footprint on the landscape would be incredibly faint. The Kingdom of Punt may be the ghost of one such civilization, a maritime power that grew rich by connecting continents, whose story was written not in stone but in the accounts of its trading partners. Its enduring mystery is a reminder that history is not just made by the empires that build in granite, but also by the cultures that mastered the sea and the forest, leaving behind only their legend and the lingering scent of incense on the wind. But while the Nazca lines capture the world's imagination with their intricate animal figures, a different kind of geoglyphic wonder, one of staggering scale and minimalist design, exists high in the Bolivian Andes. Here, in the shadow of the majestic Nevado Sajama, an extinct volcano and the highest peak in Bolivia, the landscape is inscribed with a mystery that is both simpler in form and vastly more extensive in scope. This is the network of the Sajama lines, an unimaginable web of thousands upon thousands of perfectly straight paths etched into the high-altitude plains. If you were to stand on the ground amidst them, the effect would be subtle. You might see a faint, cleared pathway stretching toward the horizon, but it is only from the dizzying perspective of an aircraft or a satellite that the true, mind-bending magnitude of this creation is revealed. The lines are not arranged to form pictures. They are a geometric masterpiece of pure line and direction, a colossal network that covers an estimated area of over 8,000 square miles, making it larger than the entire Nazca Plateau. This is not a collection of individual drawings, but a single, integrated project of such immense scale that it represents one of the most extensive human-made artworks on the planet. The sheer statistics of the Sajama lines are difficult to fully comprehend. Researchers have mapped more than 16,000 individual lines, but the true number is likely far greater. These are not short scratches. They are long, arrow-straight pathways, with some extending for astonishing distances of over 12 miles, cutting across the flat altiplano and marching relentlessly up and down the slopes of smaller hills with unwavering determination. The technique used to create them was straightforward yet effective. The local soil is covered with a dark, oxidized layer of vegetation and stones. The creators simply cleared this dark surface material away, creating a contrast by revealing the lighter, sandy-colored earth beneath. This method, similar to that used in Nazca, has proven remarkably durable in the dry, cold climate of the high Andes, preserving these pathways for centuries. The real marvel, however, lies not in the how, but in the why and in the sheer, sustained effort required. What is truly staggering about the Sajama lines is the timeline of their creation. This was not the work of a single generation or even a single century. Archaeological evidence suggests that the lines were created and maintained over a period of approximately 3,000 years, from around 3,000 years before the Common Era, right up to the time of European contact in the 14th century. This time span is almost impossible to grasp. It means that the project of creating these lines outlasted the entire Roman Empire by millennia. It implies a cultural tradition that was passed down from parent to child for over 100 generations, a sustained, communal vision that remained coherent and purposeful across an unimaginable breadth of time. This was not a fleeting artistic impulse. It was a fundamental, enduring part of the worldview of the indigenous communities who lived here, likely the ancestors of the modern Aymara people. The purpose of these lines remains an open question, and the answer is probably as complex as the network itself. One compelling theory is that they served as pilgrimage routes, guiding people from outlying villages toward the sacred peak of Nevado Sajama. In the Andean cosmos, mountains or apus are not just geological features, they are living deities, powerful spirits that control weather, water, and fertility. Walking these straight paths toward the mountain could have been a profound spiritual act, a literal and metaphorical journey to connect with the divine. The lines may have been used during specific ceremonies or festivals, with different lineages or communities responsible for maintaining their own designated pathways. Another strong possibility is that the lines functioned as a vast system of territorial markers and communication routes. In a landscape with few natural landmarks, these straight lines could have delineated the boundaries between different family groups or communities. They would have provided the most direct routes for travel, trade, and communication across the expansive plains, connecting settlements and sacred sites. The very act of creating and maintaining a line might have been a way of asserting a claim to the land and its resources, a permanent inscription of one's presence on the earth. The fact that the lines often converge from different directions suggests they may have led to central meeting places, perhaps for markets, social gatherings, or inter-community rituals. The most profound aspect of the Sajama lines is what they tell us silently about the society that built them. The ability to create and maintain such a vast, precise network over 3 millennia speaks to a level of social organization and shared purpose that is deeply impressive. It suggests a society with a powerful collective identity, where individual ambition was subsumed into a long-term communal project. There must have been a shared understanding of geometry and surveying to ensure the lines remained perfectly straight over such long distances, often across uneven terrain. This indicates a sophisticated knowledge system, passed down through oral tradition, that enabled them to impose this breathtaking geometric order upon the natural world. The Sajama lines are a testament not to a centralized imperial authority like the Incas who came much later, but to the enduring power of communal effort and a deeply rooted spiritual connection to the landscape. They represent a different model of civilization, one built on sustained cooperation and a unified vision that spanned ages, leaving behind a monument not of stone, but of line and space, a ghostly web of pathways that still whispers of a people who walked in straight lines toward their gods for 3,000 years. Venturing now into one of the most remote and rugged landscapes on Earth, we travel to the heart of southern Siberia, to a place where the very scale of the natural world seems to defy human presence. Deep within the mountainous region of Gornaya Shoria, a site has been discovered that pushes the boundaries of what we believe is possible in the ancient world. Here, scattered across a high mountain slope, lie stone blocks of such immense, mind-numbing proportions that they challenge not only our understanding of history but the very limits of engineering. We are not talking about stones that are merely large. We are talking about megaliths on a truly cyclopean scale, with the largest blocks estimated to weigh well over 3,000 tons. To put that almost unimaginable weight into perspective, that is heavier than two fully loaded Boeing 747 jumbo jets. These are not just boulders, they are geometric shapes, some appearing to be stacked one upon another like a child's giant building blocks, creating a scene that feels both chaotic and strangely deliberate. The first thing that strikes any observer is the sheer, raw power of these stones. They are composed of a hard, metamorphic rock, and their surfaces are massive, flat planes that meet at what appear to be sharp, precise angles. The way they are arranged, with smaller, yet still colossal, blocks resting atop larger foundation stones, is eerily reminiscent of another of the world's great megalithic mysteries, the podium at Baalbek in Lebanon. At Baalbek, the famous trilithon consists of 3 stones, each weighing around 800 tons, a feat that has baffled engineers for centuries. But the blocks in Gornaya Shoria are on a different scale entirely, dwarfing even the most ambitious known constructions of the ancient world. It is a comparison that immediately forces a profound question. Are we looking at a freak of geology, or are we standing amidst the ruins of a structure so grand that its purpose and builders have been completely erased from memory? This is the core of a fierce and ongoing debate. Geologists who argue for a natural origin point to the powerful forces of nature at work in such a mountainous region. They propose that these could be the result of a geological phenomenon known as exfoliation, where immense pressure from tectonic shifts causes giant, sheet-like layers of rock to fracture and slide apart. Over millions of years, frost wedging and erosion could then have further shaped these broken sheets, creating the illusion of stacked blocks with flat surfaces and right angles. From this perspective, Gornaya Shoria is a spectacular natural sculpture, a testament to the planet's raw geological power, and our human tendency to see design in random natural patterns is simply playing tricks on us. However, those who argue for a man-made origin counter with observations that are difficult to dismiss. They point to the specific, seemingly artificial arrangements. The blocks are not randomly scattered. They are piled in a way that suggests a foundation with clear courses and a sense of structural intent. Some of the stones have what appear to be perfectly straight, machine-like cuts, and there are features that look like drilled holes or intentional notches. Perhaps the most compelling argument is the simple question of location. Why would such a unique and dramatic set of fractures occur only in this one specific, concentrated area on the mountainside, creating a complex that looks so distinctly architectural, while the surrounding rock shows no similar patterning? The site does not look like a natural quarry. It looks like a construction project that was either abandoned or catastrophically destroyed. If these stones were indeed shaped and placed by human hands, the implications are nothing short of revolutionary. The logistical challenge of working with 3,000-ton blocks is almost beyond our modern comprehension. Even with today's technology, moving an object of that weight would require some of the largest cranes and transport vehicles ever built. The builders would have needed an understanding of engineering, leverage, and mass transportation that we do not attribute to any known culture in human history, let alone one existing in the harsh environment of Siberia. This would imply a level of social organization on par with a major modern nation-state, capable of marshalling thousands of workers, feeding them, and housing them in a remote location for what would have been a multi-generational project. This leads to the most radical and captivating possibility. If this is a man-made structure, who could have built it? The conventional history of Siberia tells a story of nomadic tribes, reindeer herders, and shamanic cultures, not megalithic engineers. There is no known civilization in the archaeological record of the region that possessed such capabilities. This forces us to consider a much deeper, much older timeline. What if the structure dates not from a known historical period, but from a time before the last ice age? Siberia's climate was very different then. It was not the frozen tundra we imagine today, but a cooler yet still habitable landscape. A precursor civilization, now completely lost to time, could have flourished in this region, only to be wiped out or forced to migrate by the advancing glaciers that scoured the landscape clean around 12,000 years ago. The ice sheets, miles thick, would have obliterated all traces of this culture, their cities, their tools, their very bones, leaving behind only these indestructible, mountainous blocks as the sole survivors of a cataclysm, silent witnesses to a northern civilization that mastered stone on a scale we can scarcely imagine. The Gornaya Shoria megaliths stand as a profound enigma, a challenge thrown down by the past, daring us to decide whether we are seeing the hand of nature or the ghost of a forgotten world. For centuries, the Amazon rainforest has been portrayed in the popular imagination as the ultimate pristine wilderness, a vast, impenetrable green hell that was largely untouched by human hands until the modern era. It was seen as a place where small, scattered tribes lived in harmony with nature, but where the soil was too poor and the environment too hostile to ever support large, complex societies. This idea of a counterfeit paradise was deeply ingrained in archaeology and history. Then there was the legend of El Dorado, the city of gold, a story so fantastical that it was easily dismissed as a fever dream of greedy conquistadors. But what if the legend wasn't about gold at all, but a distorted memory of something real? This is where the story of Colonel Percy Fawcett begins, a story that transforms from a tale of tragic obsession into a stunning archaeological vindication. Fawcett was a British explorer of the old school, a man drawn to the blank spaces on the map. In the early 20th century, he became fascinated by rumors and fragments of historical accounts that hinted at a great, lost civilization deep within the Amazon basin. He wasn't searching for gold, he was searching for what he called the Lost City of Z, a name he plucked from an enigmatic manuscript. Fawcett believed that a sophisticated, ancient culture had once flourished there, a society capable of building cities and roads only to vanish, leaving the jungle to reclaim its domain. He mounted several expeditions, pushing into territory that was unmapped and incredibly dangerous. In 1925, on his final, fateful journey into the Mato Grosso region of Brazil, Fawcett, along with his son and a friend, simply disappeared. They vanished without a trace, adding their own mystery to the one they sought to solve. For decades afterward, the scientific establishment largely wrote off Fawcett's theories as the delusions of a romantic adventurer. The consensus was clear: the Amazon could not have supported a major civilization. The legend of Z was just that, a legend. The tool that would ultimately prove Fawcett right was one he could never have imagined. It's called LiDAR, which stands for light detection and ranging. Think of it as a form of radar, but using laser light instead of radio waves. Mounted on an aircraft, a LiDAR scanner fires millions of laser pulses down toward the ground. These pulses penetrate the tiny gaps in the dense forest canopy, hit the ground, and bounce back to the sensor. By measuring the time it takes for each pulse to return, a computer can create an incredibly detailed, three-dimensional map of the ground surface, effectively digitally stripping away every single tree, bush and vine to reveal the naked earth beneath. It is like having X-ray vision for an entire landscape. When archaeologists began flying LiDAR over sections of the Amazon, what they saw was not a pristine wilderness, but a landscape utterly transformed by human hands. The myth of the empty jungle was shattered in an instant. The images revealed by LiDAR are nothing short of revolutionary. Beneath the unbroken green canopy, researchers found evidence of a vast, managed environment. They discovered extensive networks of straight, raised causeways that connected settlements across dozens of miles. They mapped complex geometric earthworks, perfect circles, squares, and octagons carved into the soil, some with ditches or moats surrounding them. They found the remains of large, fortified villages, complete with defensive ditches and palisades, and evidence of sophisticated agriculture, including raised fields and terra preta. The famous Amazonian dark earth, an incredibly fertile soil that was artificially created by ancient peoples through a process of adding charcoal and organic waste. This was not the work of a few simple villages. This was the signature of a large, interconnected, and highly organized society. The scale of this discovery forces a complete rewrite of Amazonian history. The prevailing theory of a pristine wilderness is simply incorrect. Instead, we now see evidence that the Amazon was for centuries a heavily managed and even urbanized landscape. Current estimates suggest that before the arrival of Europeans, the Amazon basin may have been home to as many as 5 to 10 million people, living in complex societies that actively shaped their environment. These were not just hunter-gatherers, they were engineers, farmers, and urban planners. They transformed the rainforest into a productive garden, cultivating a dizzying variety of crops and managing the forest itself to encourage useful plants and animals. The lost cities Fawcett sought were not made of stone like those in Mesoamerica or the Andes. They were built of earth, wood, and palm thatch, materials that rot away quickly in the humid tropics. When these societies collapsed, most likely due to diseases introduced by Europeans that swept through the continent like a wildfire, the jungle grew back over their earthworks and plazas with astonishing speed, hiding all traces of their existence within a few generations. Percy Fawcett was not chasing a mirage, he was decades ahead of his time. The lost city of Z was not a single, golden metropolis, but rather a whole civilization of interconnected settlements, a network of garden cities that lived in and with the rainforest rather than conquering it. The LiDAR evidence has vindicated his core belief, proving that the Amazon's past is far richer and more complex than we ever dared to believe. His tragic disappearance adds a layer of profound poignancy to this scientific breakthrough. He gave his life in search of a truth that technology would only confirm a century later, a truth that transforms our understanding of the Americas and serves as a powerful reminder that some of history's greatest mysteries are not hidden in distant deserts or beneath the ocean, but are lying just beneath our feet, waiting for the right tool to reveal them. Now we travel to the high, mist-shrouded plateau of Xiang Quang in Laos, where an entirely different kind of mystery lies scattered across the rolling green hills. Here you will not find pyramids or plazas, but something far more enigmatic and personal, thousands of massive stone jars dotting the landscape like a gathering of silent, stoic giants. This is the Plain of Jars, an archaeological site unlike any other. These are not small pottery vessels, they are immense hand-carved containers of stone, some standing as tall as a person and weighing many tons. They appear in clusters, numbering from a few dozen to several hundred at over 90 different sites across the plateau. To walk among them is to feel a profound sense of curiosity, as if you have stumbled into an abandoned workshop of some ancient, forgotten civilization, a place where a grand project was left unfinished, its purpose hidden by the passage of millennia. The jars themselves are the central puzzle, carved from a variety of local stone, including sandstone, granite, and limestone. Each one is unique. Some are cylindrical, others are more angular, and many have a distinct lip or rim around the top. The most gigantic jars are truly monumental, with the largest known specimen weighing an estimated 30 tons. The effort required to create just one of these jars would have been immense. First, the stone had to be quarried, likely from outcrops several miles away. Then, using stone and possibly iron tools, artisans would have painstakingly hollowed out the interior, a process demanding incredible skill and patience to avoid cracking the stone. Finally, the finished jar had to be transported to its final location. How this was accomplished remains a mystery, but it would have involved a combination of log rollers, rope, and the coordinated muscle of many people, a clear sign of a well-organized society capable of complex logistical feats. But the most haunting question, the one that has perplexed archaeologists since the site was first studied in the 1930s, is simply this: what were they for? The most widely accepted theory, supported by early archaeological finds, is that the jars served as funeral urns or sarcophagi. Excavations around the jars have uncovered human remains, burial goods like beads and ceramics, and in some cases, large stones that may have been used as lids. This suggests a practice where bodies were placed inside the jars, perhaps after a period of excarnation or exposure to the elements, with the jars acting as permanent, dignified resting places for the dead. In this funerary context, the plain of jars would be a vast cemetery, a sacred landscape dedicated to the ancestors, with different clusters of jars possibly belonging to specific clans or families over many generations. However, other compelling theories challenge this singular explanation. Local Lao legends offer a different story, one that speaks of a race of giants who once inhabited the plateau. According to these tales, a powerful king named Kun Cheung had the jars created to brew and store enormous quantities of a celebratory rice wine following a great military victory. This colorful explanation, while not scientific, captures the sheer scale of the jars and hints at their possible use for large-scale fermentation or storage of liquids, perhaps for communal feasts or rituals. Another practical theory proposes they were sophisticated rainwater collectors. Positioned along ancient trade routes, the jars could have provided a vital, reliable source of fresh water for merchants and travelers crossing the high plateau. The lids found nearby would have been essential for keeping the water clean and preventing evaporation. The mystery is deepened by the frustrating lack of other archaeological evidence. Unlike at other major ancient sites, we have found very little trace of the people who built the jars. There are no grand temples, no extensive residential areas, and no written records. The culture that created this sprawling monument remains a ghost, defined almost entirely by these enigmatic stone vessels. The jars are attributed to an Iron Age culture that flourished from about 500 years before the Common Era to as late as 500 years after, but we know almost nothing about their daily lives, their social structure, or their beliefs beyond this funerary practice. This absence makes the plain of jars feel even more isolated and mysterious. It is a civilization that expressed itself primarily through its interaction with the dead, leaving behind a landscape of silent questions. Adding a somber, modern layer to the ancient mystery is the fact that the Xiang Quang Plateau was one of the most heavily bombed regions during the Vietnam War. Unexploded ordnance still litters the area, making large-scale archaeological excavation dangerous and, in many places, impossible. This tragic legacy has ironically acted as a kind of preservation, preventing looting and disturbance but also locking the secrets of the jars away, protecting them with a deadly barrier. The work of clearing the sites is slow and perilous, undertaken by dedicated teams of demoners and archaeologists. Each jar that is safely accessed offers a new clue, a new piece of the puzzle. The Plain of Jars stands as a powerful reminder of the fragility of history, a site where ancient mysteries are intertwined with the scars of modern conflict. These stone sentinels have survived centuries of monsoons and the devastation of war, patiently waiting for the day when we can fully understand the unique and widespread society that placed them here, one giant jar at a time. Our journey now takes us to one of the most startling and personal discoveries on our list, a mystery not written in stone but preserved in flesh and cloth. In the relentless, arid expanse of the Tarim Basin in western China, a place of scorching heat and bitter cold, archaeologists made a find that would stop the historical narrative of Asia in its tracks. Throughout the 1980s and 90s, excavations revealed hundreds of ancient burials, and the extreme dryness of the desert air had performed a miraculous act of preservation. These were not mere skeletons, they were mummies with their skin, hair, and clothing intact, offering an incredibly intimate window into a lost world. But as researchers looked into the faces of these individuals, who had been buried between 1800 years before the Common Era and 200 years after, they were met with a sight that defied all expectations. Staring back at them were men and women with distinctly European features, high cheekbones, long noses, and most astonishingly, hair that ranged from light brown and red to full, flowing blonde. They were dressed in brightly colored woolen garments, including beautifully woven twill cloth in a pattern we would instantly recognize as tartan, centuries before such patterns appeared in the British Isles. Here, in the very heart of Asia, was a community that looked as if they had stepped out of the forests of Central Europe. The initial shock of their appearance was just the beginning. Genetic testing conducted on the mummies confirmed what their faces suggested. These people were entirely unrelated to the East Asian populations that have dominated the region for the last 2 millennia. Their DNA traced back to an ancient branch of the Indo-European family, a people who had originated somewhere on the steppes of Western Asia or Eastern Europe. This single discovery sent a tremor through the field of archaeology, completely rewriting the map of ancient human migration. The standard narrative had long held that Eastern and Western Eurasia were largely separate worlds until the Silk Road began to connect them around the 2nd century before the Common Era. The Tarim Basin mummies prove that this connection was established thousands of years earlier. A wave of nomadic herders, speaking a language that would be an ancestor to ancient tongues like Tucharian, had made an epic journey eastward, traversing thousands of miles of mountains and deserts to settle in what is now China's Xinjiang province. They were not just passing through, they established a thriving, permanent presence, creating a vibrant and unique culture in this harsh but strategically crucial crossroads. The artifacts buried with these individuals reveal a sophisticated and adaptable society. They were skilled herders relying on cattle, sheep, and goats, and they used wheeled carts, a technology that originated on the steppes. Their graves contain an eclectic mix of goods that speaks volumes about their life as cultural intermediaries. Alongside their distinctively European-style clothing, archaeologists found ephedra, a plant used in Central Asian rituals, and items that show clear influences from their Chinese neighbors to the east. They were not an isolated enclave, they were active participants in a vast prehistoric exchange network, trading goods, ideas, and technologies across the continent. Their position in the Tarim Basin, a natural corridor along the future Silk Road, made them the perfect middlemen, connecting the worlds of the East and West at a time when such interactions were thought to be impossible. This revelation forces a dramatic reassessment of early Chinese history. For a long time, Chinese civilization was often viewed as developing in splendid isolation, its innovations and cultural achievements arising independently within the Yellow River Valley. The presence of the Tarim mummies shatters that isolationist view. It suggests that from its very earliest phases, what would become Chinese culture was already in dialogue with the wider world. The chariots, metallurgy, and even certain artistic motifs that appear in early Chinese dynasties may have been influenced, at least in part, by contact with these Indo-European neighbors to the west. The interactions were likely complex, involving not just trade but also conflict and cultural borrowing, painting a picture of a much more dynamic and interconnected ancient Eurasia than we ever imagined. The most profound mystery surrounding the Tarim Basin people, however, is not their arrival but their disappearance. After flourishing for nearly 2,000 years, their distinct cultural signature fades from the archaeological record around the middle of the first millennium after the Common Era. What happened to them? They did not simply vanish. The most likely explanation is that they were gradually absorbed. As the Han Chinese Empire expanded westward, and as waves of eastern nomadic groups like the Xiongnu and later the Turks moved through the region, this small, distinctive population would have been overwhelmed by sheer numbers. Through intermarriage, cultural assimilation, and the shifting tides of power, their unique genetic and cultural identity slowly dissolved into the larger population of East Asia. Their language, Tocharian, is known to us only from fragmentary manuscripts found in Buddhist monasteries dating to much later periods, a final, fading echo of their presence. The mummies themselves stand as silent, poignant witnesses to this lost chapter. They are a powerful reminder that the human story is one of constant movement, mixing, and change. Their perfectly preserved faces challenge the very idea of fixed ethnicities and pure cultures, showing us that the ancient world was a melting pot, and that the heart of Asia was, for 2 millennia, home to a people whose origins lay in the distant West, a branch of the human family that journeyed to the ends of the earth, thrived, and then melted back into the currents of history. While the Hittites are a firmly established civilization in the annals of history, renowned for their fierce charioteers and their epic clashes with the Egyptians, the ruins of their capital, Hattusa, hold a secret that seems to belong more to the realm of science fiction than to the Bronze Age. Perched on a rugged mountain slope in central Turkey, Hattusa is an imposing sight with its cyclopean walls, its grand ceremonial gateways guarded by stone lions and sphinxes, and the countless cuneiform tablets of its royal archives that have given us a detailed, if fragmentary, picture of Hittite law, religion, and diplomacy. We know them as a powerful, bureaucratic empire, but it is a collection of small, unassuming artifacts, not the grand tablets or statues, that poses the most intriguing question about the true extent of their knowledge. Among the ruins, archaeologists have unearthed several peculiar objects made from a single piece of rock crystal, a transparent and incredibly hard form of quartz. These are not crude beads or simple ornaments. They are meticulously carved and polished into perfect convex lenses, with a clarity and optical precision that is utterly startling for an object crafted over 3,000 years ago. The existence of these crystal lenses challenges a fundamental assumption about the timeline of technology. The first known optical lenses, used for magnification, do not appear in the historical record until the classical Greeks, and even then, they were primitive compared to these Hittite artifacts. The rock crystal lenses from Hattusa are not only older by a millennium, but their quality suggests a sophisticated understanding of optics that we simply do not attribute to Bronze Age societies. When tested, some of these lenses have been found to be capable of focusing sunlight to a point, potentially able to start a fire, and they can magnify small objects with surprising clarity. This opens up a world of possibilities. Were they used by Hittite artisans as magnifying glasses for intricate work, such as sealing clay tablets with minute, detailed impressions, or for fine jewelry making? Could they have had a ritual purpose, perhaps used by priests to focus beams of sunlight during certain ceremonies, creating a dazzling, magical effect for worshippers? Or, more speculatively, were they part of a larger, more complex device that has not survived the ages, a component in an ancient telescope or a kind of prototype for a device we would not see again for centuries? The mystery deepens when we consider the material itself. Rock crystal is one of the hardest substances known to the ancient world, harder than steel. Shaping it into a perfect, smooth, curved lens without modern diamond-tipped tools would have been an extraordinarily difficult and time-consuming process. It would have required master craftsmen using abrasives like emery powder or diamond dust, painstakingly grinding the crystal against another hard stone for countless hours. This was not a casual invention. It represents a significant investment of skill and resources, implying that these lenses served a purpose important enough to justify such a demanding endeavor. The very fact that they were created suggests that the Hittites possessed a specialized technical knowledge that went far beyond simple stone carving, a lost science of optics and precision grinding that was not passed down or was lost in the collapse of their empire. This leads to a fascinating and broader implication. The Hittite Empire did not emerge in a vacuum. Anatolia had been a crossroads of cultures for millennia before their rise, home to older civilizations like the Hattians and the Assyrian merchant colonies. Is it possible that the knowledge required to create these lenses was not a Hittite invention, but an inheritance from an even older, perhaps less documented, technological tradition in the region? Could these artifacts be the last surviving fragments of a more advanced understanding of light and mechanics that was common knowledge to a precursor culture, a knowledge that the Hittites preserved but never fully comprehended or expanded upon? The lenses of Hattusa, therefore, stand as silent, crystal-clear evidence that our map of ancient technological progress is likely missing entire continents of innovation. They hint that the brilliance of the ancient world may have extended into areas we have never dreamed of, and that the collapse of empires meant the loss of not just cities and kings, but of entire branches of science that would take humanity another 1,000 years to rediscover. But perhaps the most profound and controversial underwater mystery of all lies in the deep, dark waters off the western coast of Cuba. In the year 2001, a team of oceanographers led by engineers Pauline Zaletsky and Paul Weinsweg were conducting a routine survey for the Cuban government, mapping the seabed with advanced side-scan sonar. They were working in an area known as the Cabo de San Antonio, off the Guanahacoibes Peninsula, at depths that are virtually inaccessible to conventional diving, around 2,000 feet below the surface. What their equipment revealed on the monitor was so unexpected that it would ignite a firestorm of debate that continues to this day. The sonar images showed something that should not have been there, a series of vast geometric formations spread across the ocean floor. The patterns were starkly unnatural, what appeared to be a network of massive, smooth, white stone blocks arranged in symmetrical shapes, including what looked like pyramids, roads, and large circular formations, all laid out with a precision that screamed of intelligent design rather than random geological chance. The immediate and most critical question is one of origin. Are these formations the handiwork of nature, or are we looking at the sunken ruins of a lost city? Skeptics, primarily geologists, propose a compelling natural explanation. The area is part of an immense underwater plateau, and the specific type of rock is thought to be a very hard, fine-grained granite. They argue that the seemingly perfect shapes could be the result of a phenomenon known as jointing, where tectonic forces cause the bedrock to fracture along natural, geometric planes, creating the illusion of carved blocks. Over millions of years, powerful underwater currents could have scoured and smoothed these fractured surfaces, enhancing their artificial appearance. From this perspective, the Cuban formations are a spectacular example of what geologists call a megablock zone, a fascinating but entirely natural geological feature that our pattern-seeking brains are all too eager to interpret as architecture. However, the researchers who first discovered the site, along with other investigators, point to details that are incredibly difficult to reconcile with a purely natural process. The sheer scale and organization of the site is the first clue. The structures cover an area of nearly 20 square kilometers, a sprawling complex that seems to follow a coherent urban plan. Some of the individual blocks are estimated to be the size of small buildings. Even more telling are the specific shapes observed. The sonar and subsequent robotic submersible footage allegedly revealed structures that look like great pyramids, some even appearing to be topped with what could be spherical stones. There are formations that resemble vast, concentric circles and long, straight lines that look like wide avenues or foundation walls meeting at perfect right angles. This level of complex, interconnected geometry covering such a vast area is not typically seen in natural fracture patterns, which tend to be more random. Proponents of the man-made theory argue that this is the signature of a planned architectural landscape, but the true revolutionary potential of this site lies not in its shape but in its depth. The structures are located under 2,000 feet of water. Sea levels are not constant throughout Earth's history. They are directly tied to the amount of water locked away in the polar ice caps. During the peak of the last ice age, which occurred around 20,000 to 18,000 years ago, global sea levels were approximately 400 feet lower than they are today. For the Cuban structures to have been built on dry land, they would have to be far, far older. To have been above water, they would need to have been constructed when the sea level was 2,000 feet lower. That scenario pushes the potential date of construction back to a truly remote epoch, a time when the Ice Age was at its most severe, over 10,000 years ago, and possibly even further back than that. This timeline is what separates the Cuban underwater formations from every other site on our list. If these are indeed man-made ruins, they would predate the oldest known civilization, Sumer, Egypt, the Indus Valley, by many thousands of years. They would have been built in an era that conventional history books describe as the domain of small, nomadic bands of Paleolithic hunter-gatherers, people who used simple stone tools and lived in temporary shelters. The idea that a society advanced enough to plan and construct a massive, stone-built city existed at the same time is, within the standard model of human history, absolutely inconceivable. It would mean that an entire chapter of the human story, a chapter featuring a sophisticated, seafaring, urban culture, has been completely erased from our collective memory, wiped away not by war or famine, but by a global environmental cataclysm. This leads to the most haunting and plausible explanation for such a discovery, the theory of a lost coastal civilization. Imagine a people living at the end of the last ice age, not in the interior of continents, but along the vast, fertile coastlines that are now submerged. As the world warmed and the massive glaciers began to melt, sea levels rose not slowly and steadily, but in rapid, catastrophic surges, as immense glacial lakes broke their ice dams and poured into the oceans. For a culture living on these low-lying continental shelves, the rising waters would have been an existential threat of biblical proportions. Their cities, their ports, their entire world would have been swallowed by the sea within a few generations, perhaps even within a single lifetime. The few survivors would have been forced inland, becoming refugees among less advanced hunter-gatherer societies, their grand history fading into myth and legend over the millennia. The story of a great flood is perhaps the most universal human myth, found in the Epic of Gilgamesh, the Bible, the Hindu Puranas, and the folklore of indigenous peoples from the Americas to Australia. The Cuban underwater site could be the geological proof that these stories are not mere allegories, but distant, scrambled memories of a real, historical event that devastated a forgotten world. The investigation of the site, however, has been stalled by its greatest challenge, its extreme depth. 2,000 feet is far beyond the reach of any scuba diver. It is the realm of specialized, remotely operated vehicles, or ROV, and manned submersibles, which are incredibly expensive to operate. While some limited footage has been captured by robotic subs, showing what appear to be cut stone blocks and smooth, paved surfaces, a comprehensive archaeological excavation is currently impossible. The pressure at that depth is crushing, and the logistics of recovering artifacts or conducting detailed surveys are monumental. Until technology advances or significant funding is allocated, the true nature of the Cuban underwater formations will remain one of the world's greatest unresolved mysteries. It sits on the seabed, a ghostly enigma, representing either a stunning geological coincidence or the single most important archaeological discovery in human history, a silent city waiting for the day we can finally answer the question it has posed for 10,000 years. From the deep ocean mysteries of Cuba, we now travel to a landscape that seems to represent the very opposite of water, the vast, sun-scorched Sahara Desert. Today, this is one of the most arid places on Earth, a sea of sand dunes and rocky plains where life clings to a precarious existence. But to walk through certain regions, like the Tassili Enaja Plateau in southeastern Algeria, is to enter a gallery of ghosts. Here, the silent, stone walls of caves and cliff faces are covered in thousands upon thousands of ancient paintings and engravings, and they tell a story that completely contradicts the reality of the surrounding environment. This is not art depicting a desert. This is art celebrating a lost world of water, life, and abundance. These images are a breathtaking window into a period known as the Green Sahara, a time when this entire region was a verdant savanna, teeming with animals and supporting vibrant human cultures that have since vanished without a trace, leaving only their art as a testament to their existence. The scenes depicted in these rock galleries are so vivid and detailed that they feel like snapshots from a forgotten documentary. We see herds of elephants, their massive forms carefully outlined, marching across the stone canvas. There are giraffes, their long necks stretching toward painted treetops, and hippopotamuses wallowing in waterholes that have been dry for millennia. Perhaps most startling of all are the images of crocodiles, creatures that are utterly dependent on permanent, freshwater sources to survive. These are not the hallucinations of a thirsty traveler. They are accurate, observational records of an ecosystem that is now impossible. This art provides irrefutable evidence that the climate of the Sahara has undergone a dramatic transformation. The paintings date from a period between roughly 12,000 and 4,000 years ago, a time when a shift in the Earth's orbit brought increased monsoon rains to North Africa. This turned the desert into a sprawling grassland, crisscrossed by rivers and dotted with large lakes, a paradise that supported not only wildlife but also the hunter-gatherer societies that created these magnificent works of art. As we move through the chronological layers of art at Tassili Enaja, we can witness the evolution of these Saharan cultures. The earliest phase, known as the Bubalis period, focuses almost exclusively on the natural world, with large, beautifully engraved images of the now extinct giant buffalo. This was the era of the specialized hunter, a person deeply connected to the rhythms of the animal kingdom. Later, during what is called the Roundhead period, the artistic focus shifts. While animals are still present, the human figure takes center stage, but in a strangely stylized and mystical form. These round-head figures are the most enigmatic images in the entire Sahara. They are often large, dominant presences, painted in a style that feels otherworldly. Their bodies are elongated and graceful, but their most distinctive feature is their namesake large, circular heads that are frequently featureless or contain only simple dots for eyes and a mouth. They are sometimes shown floating or dancing in groups, adorned with what appear to be ritual ornaments like feathers and elaborate body paint. The meaning of these round-head figures has been debated for decades. They do not look like realistic portraits of everyday life. Their abstract, almost alien appearance suggests they represent something beyond the mundane. Many researchers believe they are shamanic figures, depicting spiritual leaders in a state of trance, their round heads symbolizing the expansion of consciousness or a connection to the celestial sphere. They might be gods or ancestral spirits, beings from a mythological realm that was as real to the artists as the animals they hunted. This art reveals a sophisticated inner world, a complex spiritual belief system that was every bit as important as the physical environment. These people were not just surviving, they were contemplating the nature of existence, creating a symbolic language to express their relationship with the unseen forces of the universe. The final chapters of the Green Sahara are recorded in the art as well. Later paintings show a dramatic shift in lifestyle. We begin to see scenes of domestication, herds of cattle being tended by pastoralists. This marks a fundamental change from a society based on hunting to one based on herding. The images show a people who have learned to manage their environment, moving their livestock across the savanna in seasonal patterns. This period shows a rich social life with detailed scenes of village life, dancing, and music. But then the art begins to change again. The images become cruder, and the subject matter shifts to horses and chariots, indicating contact with Mediterranean cultures. Finally, around 3,000 years ago, the paintings stop altogether. The monsoon rains had shifted south once more, and the desert began to reclaim the land. The lakes dried up, the rivers vanished, and the savanna turned to dust. The cultures of the Green Sahara were faced with an existential crisis. Some likely migrated south toward the Sahel or the Nile Valley, their knowledge and traditions merging with other societies. Others may have tried to hold on, their lives becoming increasingly difficult until they too were forced to abandon their homeland. This is what makes the rock art of the Sahara so uniquely poignant. Unlike the stone cities of other lost civilizations, these cultures built with ephemeral materials, wood, grass, and hide, that have long since returned to the earth. They left behind no pyramids, no crumbling walls, no pottery shards by the millions. Their entire world, their homes, their tools, and their daily lives have been completely erased by time and the encroaching desert. The only permanent record they created was their art, painted and carved onto the most durable canvas they could find, the living rock of the mountains. These galleries are their library, their history book, and their sacred text all in one. They are a hauntingly beautiful memorial to a way of life that was entirely shaped by, and ultimately defeated by, a changing climate. The art of Tassili Enaja is a powerful reminder of the fragility of human civilization in the face of nature's immense power, and a silent, stunningly preserved echo from a green world that exists now only in these paintings and in the deep memory of the desert itself. Now, we turn our attention to one of the most iconic and widely recognized monuments on Earth, the Great Sphinx of Giza. For generations, its story has been neatly woven into the tapestry of ancient Egyptian history. The standard narrative, supported by the majority of Egyptologists, attributes its construction to the pharaoh Khufu, the builder of the second largest pyramid at Giza, dating it to around 2,500 years before the Common Era. This majestic lion with a human head is seen as a timeless guardian of the plateau, a symbol of royal power sculpted during the golden age of the Old Kingdom. Yet for decades, a small but persistent chorus of dissenting voices has pointed to a set of physical clues that simply do not fit this comfortable timeline. The most compelling of these clues is not found in ancient texts or hidden chambers, but etched plainly into the very stone of the Sphinx itself, and it suggests a history far more ancient and mysterious than we have ever been taught. The controversy centers on the unique pattern of erosion visible on the limestone walls of the Sphinx enclosure, the deep pit from which the colossal statue was carved. While the Sphinx's body shows the expected signs of wind and sand erosion, a smoothing and weathering typical of a desert environment, the walls surrounding it tell a different story. Here, geologists like Robert Schoch of Boston University have identified deep, vertical, and undulating fissures. These are not the horizontal, sand-blasted patterns caused by wind. They are classic textbook examples of water erosion, specifically precipitation runoff. Imagine a heavy, sustained downpour falling on a soft limestone landscape. The water would not soak in evenly. It would cascade down the slopes, seeking the path of least resistance, carving out these distinct vertical channels and gullies over centuries. This is the kind of erosion we see in regions with significant rainfall, not in one of the driest places on the planet. This observation leads to a profound geological puzzle. When was the last time the Giza Plateau experienced rainfall heavy and persistent enough to carve such deep scars into the rock? The climate of Egypt has not always been the hyper-arid desert we see today. Paleoclimatology, the study of past climates, provides a clear answer. The data shows that after the end of the last ice age, North Africa went through a much wetter period, known as the Neolithic subpluvial. This was a time of savanna-like conditions with regular, significant rainfall. However, this wet period effectively ended around 5,000 years before the Common Era. By the time the Sphinx was supposedly built for Pharaoh Khufu, around 2,500 years before the Common Era, the region was already as dry as it is today. The heavy rains required to create the deep, vertical gullies on the enclosure walls had not fallen for thousands of years prior to its traditional construction date. This discrepancy forms the core of the radical hypothesis. If the water erosion on the enclosure walls is real, then the Sphinx must be old enough to have experienced those heavy rains. This pushes its origin back to at least the wet period, which ended around 5,000 years before the Common Era, and possibly even earlier. Some researchers, accounting for the depth of the erosion, argue for a date as far back as 7,000 or even 10,000 years before the Common Era. This is not a minor adjustment, it is a chronological earthquake. It would mean the Sphinx is thousands of years older than the pyramids that stand behind it, and predates the very civilization of dynastic Egypt itself. The implications are staggering. It suggests that a sophisticated society, capable of planning and executing a project of monumental sculpture, existed in the Nile Valley long before the first pharaohs unified the land. Unsurprisingly, this theory has been met with fierce resistance from mainstream Egyptology. Critics offer alternative explanations for the erosion. Some propose that the weathering was caused not by rainfall from above, but by groundwater seepage or capillary action, where moisture from the Nile aquifer rose up through the limestone, dissolving the rock from within. Others suggest that the wind, carrying abrasive sand particles, could have created the vertical patterns under specific conditions, or that the original quality of the limestone, which is layered and variable, is primarily responsible for the uneven weathering. They also point to the complete absence of any archaeological evidence, no tools, no pottery, no settlements, that would indicate an advanced culture capable of building the Sphinx in that remote era. For them, the archaeological context, which firmly places the Sphinx within the funerary complex of Khafre, is the more reliable guide. The debate ultimately forces us to confront the limits of our knowledge and the methods we use to interpret the past. The geological evidence speaks the language of millennia, of slow, patient processes acting on stone. The archaeological evidence speaks the language of human history, of kings and cultures, and the artifacts they leave behind. Reconciling these two timelines is the great challenge. If the water erosion hypothesis is correct, it does more than just age the Sphinx. It opens a door to a forgotten epoch. It hints at a precursor civilization, a culture that may have laid the philosophical or even the technological groundwork for the sudden, spectacular emergence of dynastic Egypt. Perhaps the ancient Egyptians themselves did not build the Sphinx from scratch, but instead discovered a much older, weathered monument on the Giza Plateau, a relic from a lost age, and restored it, adopting it as their own, its true origins fading into the mythology of a god-king. The Sphinx, therefore, sits at the heart of a great historical mystery, its silent, weathered body holding a secret that could rewrite the story of human civilization, challenging us to decide whether we are looking at the beginning of a known story or the enigmatic end of one that has been lost to time. The story of Hylike brings us from the realm of speculative, deep time mysteries to a historical event that is both tragically documented and astonishingly real. In the 4th century before the Common Era, the city of Hylike was a prominent and powerful member of the Achaean League, located on the fertile coastal plain of the Gulf of Corinth. It was a thriving center of trade and culture, but it was also famous throughout the Greek world for its unique religious significance. Hylike was the primary center for the worship of Poseidon, the god of the sea and earthquakes. The city's patron god was honored with a magnificent sanctuary and a sacred grove of trees, and Hylike's coinage famously featured the imposing head of Poseidon. The irony of this devotion would soon become terrifyingly clear. In the winter of 373 before the Common Era, the region was struck by a catastrophe so profound that it was seared into the memory of the ancient world. Contemporary writers like the historian Diodorus Siculus recorded the terrifying events. For several days beforehand, the inhabitants were warned by ominous signs. Animals, mice, snakes, and weasels were seen fleeing the city in great numbers, heading for higher ground, a classic precursor to seismic activity that the people of Hylike could not interpret. Then a massive earthquake struck. The ground shook violently, but the horror did not end there. The earthquake was so powerful that it caused a large section of the coastline to liquefy and slump into the sea. Immediately following the quake, a gigantic tsunami, a wall of water generated by the subterranean collapse, rushed in from the Gulf of Corinth, engulfing the stricken city. Hylike and every soul who had not escaped was swallowed by the waves. The city and its sacred precinct of Poseidon vanished beneath the sea, leaving only a few tiles from rooftops visible to mark the spot. It was a cataclysm of biblical proportions, a direct and brutal strike from the very god the city had worshipped. In the aftermath, the story of Hylike's destruction became a powerful moral lesson and a legend. The Greek writer Pausanias, traveling through the area centuries later, reported that the bronze statue of Poseidon could still be seen entangled in the underwater reeds, a ghostly fisherman's hazard. For nearly 2,000 years, the exact location of the lost city remained a mystery. Historians and archaeologists knew it had to be somewhere on the coast of the Peloponnese, but the landscape had changed dramatically over the centuries due to sedimentation from nearby rivers. The sea had receded, and what was once a coastline was now a wide, flat plain of agricultural land. The search for Helike became one of archaeology's great quests, a real-world hunt for a city that ancient sources insisted was right there, yet was completely invisible. The breakthrough finally came in the late 1980s and 90s, thanks to a combination of persistent scholarship and modern technology. Two Greek archaeologists, Dora Katsanopoulou and Stephen Soter, spearheaded the effort. They meticulously re-examined the ancient texts and used geological core sampling to probe the deep sediments of the coastal plain. Instead of diving into the sea, they began to dig into the earth. Their reasoning was brilliant. The city wasn't out in the modern sea. It was buried inland under layers of silt and gravel deposited by the rivers over the centuries. Their painstaking work paid off. They discovered the remains of Helike not on the seabed, but several hundred meters from the present shoreline, buried beneath nearly 10 feet of sediment. They uncovered the foundations of buildings, pottery, coins, and even a possible Roman bathhouse built over the ruins, confirming that the classical city lay beneath. The legend was true. Helike had been found not by searching the waves but by reading the land. The rediscovery of Helike is far more than just a successful archaeological story. It serves as a powerful and tangible link between ancient myth and modern science. The detailed accounts written by Greek and Roman historians were not exaggerated fables. They were accurate reports of a real, devastating natural disaster. This validation gives tremendous credibility to other ancient tales of sunken cities and floods that are often dismissed as pure allegory. Helike proves that the mechanisms of destruction, earthquakes, liquefaction, and tsunamis, are real and have been reshaping coastlines and erasing human settlements for millennia. It stands as a stark cautionary tale about human vulnerability in the face of geological forces, a lesson as relevant today for cities built on fault lines or low-lying coasts as it was in 373 before the Common Era. But perhaps the most exciting implication of Helike's discovery is the hope it offers for future exploration. If a major Greek city so well documented could be lost for 24 centuries and then found buried under a field, how many other coastal settlements from antiquity might share a similar fate? The Mediterranean and other seismically active coastlines are littered with the stories of cities that vanished into the sea. Helike demonstrates that they may not be lost forever. They may simply be waiting, preserved in a tomb of mud and sand, for the right combination of technology, dedication, and a little bit of ancient testimony to guide the excavator's trowel. The recovery of Helike is a reminder that the past is not always as distant as it seems, and that the waves that take away can also, in time, give back. So, what are we to make of all this? We have journeyed across 6 continents and dived beneath the waves, examining 33 separate enigmas. Each site, on its own, is a fascinating puzzle that challenges a small piece of the historical narrative. But the true revolution begins not when we look at them individually, but when we step back and see them as a collective, as pieces of a single, global jigsaw puzzle. Viewed together, a startling and consistent pattern emerges, one that points toward a profound recalibration of our entire understanding of the human story. The evidence is no longer a collection of isolated anomalies. It forms a coherent, albeit shadowy, new picture. The recurring theme is undeniable: sophisticated human activity appearing at dates that simply do not fit within the comfortable, linear timeline we have been taught. This is not about finding a single mythical lost continent like Atlantis. That idea, while captivating, is too simplistic. The pattern we are seeing is far more complex and in many ways more compelling. It suggests not one monolithic super-civilization that spanned the globe, but rather a series of advanced and likely interconnected cultures that flourished during a specific window of time, the tumultuous period at the end of the last ice age, approximately 12,000 years ago. This was an era of dramatic environmental upheaval. As the massive glaciers retreated, they triggered catastrophic floods, rapid sea level rise, and violent shifts in climate. It was a world in flux, a planet emerging from a deep freeze, and it is precisely within this chaotic context that we find the fingerprints of these forgotten societies. They were not necessarily unified by a single government or language, but they may have shared a similar level of technological and social sophistication, each adapting to their local environment in remarkable ways. Consider the geographical and technological threads that connect these sites. We see evidence of advanced stone working at Göbekli Tepe in Turkey and Puma Punku in Bolivia, separated by an ocean yet displaying a similar reverence for monumental precision. We find hints of sophisticated seafaring cultures in the submerged structures off Yonaguni, Japan, and in the legend and potential ruins of Dwarka, India, suggesting that ocean voyages were not a later development but a key feature of this ancient epoch. The very fact that so many of these sites are now underwater, from the Cuban formations to the sunken city off India, points to a common cause: the rapid inundation of coastal areas as the ice caps melted. This wasn't a slow process. At times it occurred in sudden, devastating surges, swallowing the homelands of coastal peoples and erasing the bulk of their architectural achievements. What survived were the structures built on high ground, the temples on hills, the pyramids on plateaus, the last surviving peaks of a sunken world. This new model completely inverts the traditional narrative of human progress. Instead of a slow, steady climb from simplicity to complexity, we see evidence of an early peak, a forgotten zenith of human achievement that was followed by a catastrophic collapse. The conventional timeline, which places the cradle of civilization in Mesopotamia just 6,000 years ago, may not represent the beginning of complex society, but rather a rebirth, a rediscovery of old knowledge by the survivors of that earlier cataclysm. The Sumerians, the Egyptians, the Indus Valley peoples, they may not have been the inventors of civilization, but its inheritors. They were the ones who managed to preserve and rebuild, laying the foundation for the historical era we know. The true pioneers, the original architects of this cycle, are the ones whose names are lost to us, whose cities lie under the sea, and whose greatest monuments, like Göbekli Tepe, were deliberately buried as if to preserve them for a future they knew would forget. This perspective transforms these 33 sites from mere curiosities into poignant memorials. They are the scattered survivors of a global dark age, a period of amnesia that lasted for millennia. The great flood myths found in cultures across the planet, from the Mesopotamian epic of Gilgamesh to the story of Noah, from the Maya Popol Vuh to the Aboriginal Dreamtime stories, may not be mere allegories. They could be the distilled cultural memories of a real historical trauma, a worldwide event that shattered the human world and reset the clock of progress. The evidence we have been exploring is the physical proof of that lost world, a world that possessed the knowledge, the organization, and the vision to shape stone with incredible skill, to map the stars, and to build monuments that have endured for 12,000 years. We are not looking for a single lost city. We are piecing together the fragments of a lost epoch, an age of humanity that has been hidden in plain sight, waiting for us to finally recognize its profound and game-changing significance. This journey through 33 unmapped ruins reveals a history far richer, more complex, and more mysterious than we ever learned in school. These sites are not merely curiosities to be filed away in a textbook. They are active, demanding pieces of a colossal, global puzzle. Each one, from the towering heads of the Olmecs to the geometric perfection of the Bolivian Sajama lines, is a question mark carved in stone, etched into the earth, or submerged beneath the waves, challenging the very core of the linear narrative we have accepted for so long. They force upon us a necessary humility, an acknowledgement that the vast gaps in our knowledge are not empty spaces waiting to be filled with more of the same story, but are instead canyons that might contain entirely different worlds. We must remain open to the profound possibility that great civilizations, with their own triumphs and tragedies, have risen and fallen across this planet long before the cultures we proudly label as ancient ever laid their first foundation stones. The true timeline of human civilization, it seems, is not a straight, upward-sloping line of progress from primitive to advanced. That model is too simple, too clean for the messy, cyclical, and often catastrophic reality of our past. A far more accurate image is that of a grand tapestry woven with countless threads of different colors and strengths. Some of these threads, like the empires of Rome and Egypt, are bright and well documented, forming the main pattern we are so familiar with. But what we are now discovering are the fainter, older threads, ones that were woven into the fabric much earlier, perhaps forming an entire underlying pattern that was later covered over. Many of these threads have been lost entirely, leaving behind only tantalizing gaps and unexplained knots. The tapestry is still beautiful, but it tells a different, more intricate story than we first imagined. A story of false starts, forgotten zeniths, and knowledge lost and found again. Perhaps the greatest mystery, then, is not locked away in the past itself, but lies in the vast, uncharted territory of what we have yet to discover. For every Göbekli Tepe that is unearthed, how many more are still buried beneath the sands of time? The recent revelations in the Amazon, made possible by LiDAR technology, prove that we have been looking for lost cities in all the wrong ways, our vision blocked by the very jungles we assumed were pristine. What other game-changing technologies await us that will allow us to peer through solid ground, to map the deepest ocean floors with clarity, or to extract precise dates from stone itself? The next decade of exploration promises to be more revolutionary than the last century, as we combine advanced science with a newfound willingness to question the established narrative. The most exciting chapters of human history have not yet been written. They are waiting to be excavated, scanned, and decoded. The greatest ruins may not be the ones we can see, but the ones we are only just beginning to imagine. So, after this journey across continents and millennia, the floor is now open to you. What do these silent stones and sunken cities tell you about our shared human story? Does the evidence point toward a single catastrophic event, a global cataclysm like a massive comet impact or rapid polar shift that wiped the slate clean for a sophisticated prehistoric world? Or do you see a different pattern, one of incredible cultures rising independently in isolated pockets, each reaching their own brilliant zenith before succumbing to local environmental pressures, internal strife, or simply the slow march of time? There are no easy answers here, only fascinating possibilities. I am genuinely eager to hear your perspective. Share your own theories, your biggest questions, and the mystery that captivates you the most in the comments section below. Let's continue this conversation together. If this exploration of history's hidden chapters has sparked your curiosity, if it has made you look at the ancient world with a new sense of wonder, then please show your support by giving this video a like. And for more journeys into the deepest mysteries of our past, from lost technologies to forgotten empires, Make sure to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you never miss an adventure. The past is not a closed book, it is an open field of discovery filled with secrets waiting to be unearthed. This is just the beginning. The next great mystery is waiting for us, and I look forward